You've got the big story today, haven't you? The sentencing.
I mean, I wish we didn't. I mean, it's just awful. We have the sentencing of Axel Rudiger-Cabana. Sometime this morning, it's starting at 11.
Yeah.
The question, we kind of know what he's going to get, but he was under 18, under 21.
Yeah.
Can't get a whole life tariff. We're going to be hearing, I think, from some of the parents, hearing the prosecution. We may get more details about the case. We'll bring that to everyone first, of course. But we're asking today, but, you know, how do we tackle knife crime?
Yeah.
I mean, how many 12-year-old killed, a 14-year-old killed? How do we stop this? I don't think it's down to Amazon.
It really isn't.
I'm going out on a limb here.
Julia Hartley-Brewer coming next. We'll see you tomorrow at 6.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. I very much appreciate your joining me. And whether you are listening on DAB+ radio, watching on YouTube, listening on your smart speaker, watching a connected device, all the different ways of keeping in touch with us, it is absolutely fantastic to have you join us. Lots to talk about today. I'm with you live all the way until 1 o'clock. Now, at 11 o'clock this morning, we do have the beginning of the sentencing at Liverpool Crown Court of Axel Rudiger-Cabana on those 16 charges involving the Southport attack, including the murder of 3 little girls, the attempted murder of 8 other little children and 2 adults. We're going to hear comments from the judge. We are going to hear, we understand, some victim statements read out by some of the parents. Now, whether we get those read out live or whether we get a transcript of those, we are not sure. And then we will hear, we hope, a little bit more about what really happened with Axel Rudiger-Cabana, not just on the day, but also what actually happened in the lead up to that horrific crime, to try and make some sense of it. We've got analysis, we've got guests, we've got a former Home Office Minister, lawyers to comment. We're just going to be waiting to find out what that sentence is going to be. Realistically, not a whole life tariff, as in you go to prison and you come out in a box, which I think is pretty much what most of us are looking for, because he was 17 at the time of the attacks, under 21, not even just under 18. That is not an option, but we do expect him to get a life sentence. The question is what the minimum term would be. I think for you and me, life should mean life. Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I want to hear all your thoughts on that. But we know already in the Sun newspaper today, the father of one of the victims of the Southport stabbings, one of those children who thankfully survived but needed surgery for her injuries. Those children all have anonymity for life, as obviously the parents can't be identified. But he has called for Rudika Barnett to rot in jail, urging the judge to show no mercy as the 18-year-old killer faces jail time. We're also going to be talking about the Prime Minister's own independent reviewer of terrorism. He's warned that Keir Starmer's proposal to expand terrorism laws to cover killers like Rudika Barnett, who don't have a specific ideology, could actually overwhelm counter-terrorism officers, something we've been discussing all week. And we're also going to be talking about the Defence Secretary saying that Britain will not shy away from robust action after a Royal Navy submarine sent a warning to a Russian spy ship loitering near vital undersea cables. What on earth is Putin up to? We'll talk about that. Plenty more besides. Tesco joining the other supermarkets, backing the farmers on their tax protest. Also, a bill coming before Parliament tomorrow, which would basically bring us to complete and utter societal collapse within about 5 years, possibly within only about a few years. But yeah, 200 MPs support it. You may think that that sounds crazy, but no, it's really happening. And by the way, this is exactly the sort of measure that got us to where we are right now with net zero. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit later as well. Now, joining me for all the conversation today, I'm delighted to say, is Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. Thank you, as always, for joining us on a Thursday.
Good morning. It's nice to be here again.
So much to talk about. I'm going to put the question out to people right now before we start talking, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. After the Southport attack, 3 children dead, 8 other children horrifically injured. We've got fatal stabbings of children. Last week, a 14-year-old stabbed to death in broad daylight on a bus. Yesterday, so on Monday, we learned about it on Tuesday. On Tuesday, sorry, we learned about it on Wednesday. Because, by the way, these things happen so often, it's difficult to keep up with the days. Yeah,
it's shocking.
That tells me everything. A 12-year-old stabbed to death, a 14-year-old under arrest. Question: how do we tackle knife crime? Because I'm not sure the government's got a good plan on this. No. Certainly don't think the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has a good plan on this. Is it just lots more rules about buying a knife online? Because I'm not sure that is it. Yeah, I don't want people to be able to buy 10-foot machetes, but, how do we actually tackle knife crime? Because I've got a funny feeling it's kind of about the people more than it is about the actual weapons. I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is a number to call. You can text us the word talk, then your message to 87222. You can get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Philip, as we wait, in an hour's time we're going to be hearing the judge talking at Liverpool Crown Court, Mr Justice Goose. How do we tackle knife crime?
Well, that's a $6 million question, I think. I think we need to start to bring back in some responsibility in society, and we should bring in parental responsibility. If a child leaves a house with a knife, the parent should know that that child has got a knife or something that could cause harm.
I think sometimes they do know.
Well, if they do know, then the parents are as culpable as the child. And yeah. I think if we started to get harsh, and if a child is arrested for committing a crime with a knife, the parent should be arrested as well for lack of care of the child, and then they have to disprove.
I mean, you say parents. Realistically, we know in most of these cases there isn't a dad around. Certainly not in the home. Yeah. I do think, we are really going to have to talk about that. We're also going to have to talk about how often these cases involve children from certain different backgrounds, certain different communities. I don't know about you. I haven't read a story about a whole spate of children from Chinese families.
Yeah.
Who are doing this. There are certain communities where this is happening. In London, it's Afro-Caribbean.
Yeah.
Not West African. It's not a colour thing. Yeah. It's Afro-Caribbean. Lack of dads. 45% single parent family. Not having a go at the mums, but where's dad? Although People need to, I'm sorry, the single best thing you can do for your child is to bring them up with mum and dad in the same house. That is the single best thing you can do for them. We need to talk about going back to basics on a lot of this stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
They're being failed by family, they're being failed by schools, they're being failed by social workers, they're being failed by police, slaps on the hands, a little bit of shoplifting here, a little bit of drug dealing here, then you've got a knife, the gang. But I mean, also, children, there are lots of children who go to school in the morning carrying a knife because they're absolutely terrified of the gang in their local neighbourhood. Why are we not stopping that from happening? Do we not have the wherewithal to stop that?
And what most of those kids who are carrying a knife because they're scared of that don't realise is that there's a greater chance that they're going to get stabbed by their own knife if they pull it. And this is where it is a cultural thing, it is a society thing, it is a community thing, and if there aren't the fathers there, then there needs to be some form of support for the mothers. There needs to be increase in community support. There needs to be. I remember when I was at school, if someone came in with something that the rest of us thought was a bit dodgy in whatever it was, we would turn around and say, "Oi!" and remove it from them so that they didn't get into trouble and we didn't get into trouble if we were caught in the periphery of what was going on. We need to bring that back into society again.
Again, I think we need to bring shame into society. I mean, we heard about the 14-year-old who was stabbed on the bus the other week, and again, he was in gangs. He was in gangs. He carried a knife into school, the week earlier or the day earlier. I mean, people get always wrong, and he's written off. He'd been in care for a few years. He'd been in care from primary, from secondary school onwards, and then he'd left care and he'd been living on the streets. Yeah. He was covered in tattoos. His mum was. She'd obviously completely unable to keep control of this kid. Yeah. Said gangs had got to him. Now you can say, well, mum, you should have been there. Well, yeah, but mum failed. But when mum fails, when dad fails, when mum fails, someone else needs to be there. And again, the Axel Rudikapana case, we know that the father feared the son was going to try and commit a massacre, at his old high school where he'd been expelled for violence, for carrying a knife, for using a bat to a hockey stick, to beat children, and desperate trying to stop him from getting in a taxi and going to the school. So even parents who are trying to do the right thing, I mean, we don't know don't know how much the parents are. Have to take responsibility for this. But again, if we've had parents again and again saying, I went to the authorities, I begged them to do something, he's referred to prevent 3 times, nothing happens. There is obviously such an abject failure of people falling through the cracks. Yep. What do you make of this idea that the whole, the terrorism definition needs to be widened? Because lots of concern that actually that just stretches resources even further.
I think this is another rabbit hole that's been thrown out there for people to jump down. You only identify the motivation of someone who carries out an attack after they've carried out the attack and after you do the investigation. Beforehand, whenever someone is planning a mass killing, whether it be a lone individual or whether it be a group of individuals, you don't know whether their motivation is terrorist motivation or something else. So there's nothing wrong with if something gets flagged up, it going into the same resources that would be looking after lone wolf terrorists, so that you're stopping a mass attack and the police can coordinate things together. Changing the definition, I don't think is a bad thing. I don't think
unless there are extra resources.
But I don't think there are thousands of people out there that are going to suddenly come onto the police radar in dealing with this thing. And at the moment, the police have got 900 people in 900 investigations into 3,000 people actively today on terrorism issues. Another 200 to 300 on top of that it's going to impact resources, but not massively if it saves lives, because you can bring more national resources to monitoring an individual and force different agencies to have to come together. If.
What do you make of the calls from Nigel Farage and people like that saying that Angela Rayner needs to apologise for suggesting the she stated the Southport attacks were not terror-related. The Deputy Prime Minister claimed Nigel Farage, when he did his video back in the summer, saying he believes that we're not being given the full story. She accused him of spreading fake news after he questioned whether the tragedy was linked to terrorism. I mean, he had an Al-Qaeda manual and was making ricin. She was very, very, very clear, that this was, she said, he must understand you have a level of responsibility. You're a community leader. You're elected to represent your constituency. It's not your level of responsibility not to stoke up what conspiracy theories or what you think might happen or lead into what you think. We want, and she was very, very clear that it absolutely wasn't a terrorist attack. I mean, as he pointed out, he was right all along. Yeah. Well, he was. Okay, it was a terror attack.
He wasn't. And she's dancing.
But we were being lied to.
Yeah, and she's dancing in the head of a pin to mislead, and that's what she's doing.
And she would have known as well.
And she will have known. And this is where Keir Starmer's a lawyer. I've had to deal with some very sensitive things in intelligence gathering with lawyers. And you find that there's two types. There's a disabling lawyer who will always say, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't.
Yeah.
And then there's an enabling lawyer, and the other ones that go, I understand what you're trying to do. Here's a way of doing it within the law.
Yeah.
Starmer is a disabling lawyer, and that, unfortunately, is most of them.
He's a computer says no lawyer, isn't he? Absolutely. Can we also talk about the extraordinary story? The front page of the Telegraph, they got through Freedom of Information requests, basically from... It's the most bizarre thing. It's a study carried out by Thames Water, an academic study, basically trying to see, look, what are our actual needs for supplying water? Because we need this whole thing. When you're building houses, you're building roads, you're supplying electricity, gas, water, and hospitals and everything else. You need to know how many people there are in the country. It's one of the reasons why we have a census every 10 years, so we actually know how many people are here. It's very, very crucial. They've discovered the most extraordinary thing. Are you surprised by this? That we have up to 1 in 12 people in the capital city, they believe, is an illegal migrant. 1 in 12. As many as 585,000 illegal migrants are illegal here. So something like 60% of the 1 million people who they believe to be illegal migrants in this country, largely people not who've come across on those migrant boats, but people who have come here legally on a tourist visa, on a study visa, or a work visa, but have overstayed. Now, I would suggest the figure is probably double that.
Yep.
And one of the reasons I would suggest that is because when they had applications from EU citizens to stay post-Brexit, to apply to their legal, if you've been here for a number of years, you can apply to stay. No one's throwing you out. We're just going to limit rights to people coming in the future. Turned out there were 2 million more EU citizens in the country legally than we knew about. What are the odds that we know less about legal migrants than illegal migrants? There are so many people now living in this country. I mean, estimates like 1.5, possibly 2 million people living here, using resources, going to A&E, going to a doctor, kids at school who have no right to be here. I know the numbers aren't as extreme as what we've seen in America. 11 million people they think have crossed the Mexican border in just the last 4 years. But given we're a smaller country with a smaller population, that's a huge number of people. And when I look around, the number of people begging on the streets, harassing you in the street now. I'm thinking, that figure is probably an underestimate.
Yeah, and we hear of the government sending more people back to their home countries. They're not sending the illegal migrants that are coming across the channel back. They're sending people that they catch with this visa side of things. But it highlights something that we have in British society where we don't know the reality of what's going on. Yeah. I got an answer to Freedom of Information Act request yesterday on how many non-British personnel are MPs in Parliament, and Parliament doesn't know.
Or MPs, or working for MPs?
No, who are elected MPs in Parliament, and they don't know. They allow Irish citizens and Commonwealth citizens from certain areas to be members of Parliament, but they don't know how many don't have a British passport, are not British citizens. They don't have that data. If they don't have that data, then of course they're not going to know.
Of course they're not going to know who's working in a local nail bar or garage.
Exactly.
Or the local Deliveroo driver.
Yeah.
I know, I just find it extraordinary. And again, we know what's happening with Donald Trump, and we know that the bleeding heart, even if you're watching BBC and Sky and everyone else, they've already started the bleeding heart stuff. I mean, quite apart from, the stuff on DEI and recognition of biological reality, only two genders. But the sort of awful, all these people, and these people who are going to be deported. What, the people who've come illegally going to be made to go back to their own countries? This is not funny. Controversial. There's controversial legislation. This is not controversial to the vast majority of people. Yeah. It's quite extraordinary.
It is. It's protecting the American taxpayer from...
But also they're saying, quite a people are saying, what, all these people, these jobs, they're the people who are picking the fruit, they're the people who are delivering your takeaway, these are the people washing up in the restaurants, and when people have to start paying, I actually genuinely heard somebody, an American reporter on BBC yesterday saying, and when people actually start realising, American citizens, how much more they're going to have to pay for things. Yeah, because people are being paid illegally to work below legal wages, normal wages. And guess what? When they can't hire those people, employers are going to have to hire Americans and boost their wages. Things are going to cost more, but Americans will be paid more. And that's exactly what happens here. And when we actually kind of close the border a bit, when we did actually do a bit of that post-Brexit, for a little bit, well, lockdown, we did actually see, what a funny thing, wages rose because employers couldn't pay a load of people off the books.
And what it's doing is it's getting rid of what's effectively slavery in the United States.
Yes.
It's getting rid of the illegal gangs that are controlling it. So it's going to impact crime on the streets and everything else. And it is happening here in exactly the same way.
Absolutely. So much more I want to talk about, including, I mean, especially with your expertise in the military, over what Putin's spy ships are doing. Also, Keir Starmer vowing to override the whims of NIMBYs. We'll see about that. I mean, I actually agree with him on some stuff. So much more to talk about, but I do want to hear from you. After the Southport attack, fatal stabbings of children in London and Birmingham, some by other children, it's suspected. How do we tackle knife crime? Because I've got a funny feeling it's not by, wagging our finger at Amazon and their rules. Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We'll get your calls up next. But also, straight after that, going to be talking to a journalist who has, looked into an awful lot more about what we do know behind the scenes from Axel Rudabukana's interest in his life and what may have been the motivation behind the killer. Do stay tuned for that. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Ian, I woke up this morning. I never got bed till 3 o'clock this morning because last night I saw that a 12-year-old child had been stabbed to death. 12-year-old child, one of the youngest in recent times in Birmingham. I woke up this morning 4 hours later and I spent an hour posting on all the stabbing murders around Britain. There was even a girl that was raped, for example, in Hampshire. This is how serious crime is out of vogue. She was abducted at knife point by two 14-year-old boys.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Thank you so much for joining us. 10:23 is the time. Philip Ingram is still with me, and we're asking you today, as we head up to 11 o'clock, we will get the sentencing of Axel Ruderbana for the horrific stabbings in the Southport attack. It may take quite some hours as we're going to hear details of the case. We're going to hear victim statements and the like. So we'll bring it to you wherever we can. Whenever we get any new information, we'll bring it to you here first. But I do want to know from you, how do we tackle knife crime? Let's go straight to your calls on 0344 499 1000. Let's go to Sue, who's in Cheltenham. A very good morning to you, Sue.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. What do you want to say?
Knife crime is a very complex problem. I have children who are adopted. I have one who's autistic who actually took a knife into school.
Oh, gosh.
School handled it absolutely amazingly. He wasn't in a gang. He didn't have a lot of friends at school. He'd irritated some children in the class just by the way he used to tap and make noises occasionally. And he wasn't taken out of the class, and he irritated them to the point where they ambushed him at break time and pinned him over a car bonnet where he couldn't be seen. He was out of sight of cameras. And they basically said to him, "So what are you going to do about it? Bring a knife into school?"
So he did.
Which to an autistic child is, well, yeah, he did. He took a knife out of the kitchen, not a very dangerous knife. Well, I mean, all knives are dangerous, but it wasn't a knife that would have done a lot of harm. He wrapped it up. It was in the bottom of his bag. He didn't get it out at school, but his friends noticed it. So the school called me, and they handled it absolutely amazingly. The police were involved. They said he wasn't the sort of child that would do that sort of thing, that was in a gang, involved in drugs or anything like that. And they took him out of school. They excluded him for 2 weeks and trialled some online learning with him, which was fantastic. The police came round. They said, they looked around and they said, it's not the sort of house that we normally come to. It's nothing like we normally go to. And, you know, he's obviously not a child that really is a danger. But the problem is, isn't it, that if you have a blanket, well, if you're caught with a knife, you get some kind of...
But also, and we talk a lot of this, we've been talking a lot in this week about, what about the parents? But, you had no idea. Thank God friends stepped in. Yeah. Having good friends. But what do you say to that when someone goes, well, your kid took a knife into school. What have you been doing as a parent?
Yeah, well, I had absolutely no idea. Yeah. And... it was a response to something at school, and the school recognised that they should have stepped in and taken him out of the class beforehand. It would never have happened. But the police got involved. He didn't get any kind of criminal record. They set him up with, I don't know whether it's a charity, but it was certainly a person working in some organisation to do with knife crime, and he had one-to-one sessions, going out doing bonding stuff, but talking about it. And he understood, and I explained to him, I said, you could have ruined your life doing this, you could have been excluded from school, you'd have never achieved what you wanted, and they just handled it so well. And he was back in school. They had a reintegration meeting. They looked at what the issues were and what should have happened beforehand. And he's now at university and doing brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly.
That is very, very good to hear. But again, maybe a kid like yours, perhaps not so disturbed as we think Axel Ruderbana and other kids are, not involved in the gangs, and a loving family who engaged, and thank God. So I so appreciate your call. Thank you very much. And that is, again, the morning, Philip Ingram, these things can happen. Kids get scared, especially, an autistic child. Okay, what are you going to do? Bring a knife in? Okay, yeah. And a lot of kids will think, I do need to have a knife.
But again, this is where the kids that pinned him down to the car bonnet and bullied him into that, they're the ones that are behind all of this. And though for those are the ones that we need to be concerned about.
Absolutely. Let's go to John, who is in Dorset. Hello, John.
Good morning, Julia.
Very good morning. What do you want to say?
Briefly, the police aren't doing their job. If I could just take an example, Sadiq Khan once boasted that he had 900 officers monitoring the internet. Yeah. After Southport, we see people, you will go straight to jail, bypass the magistrate's court for 30 words, and somebody copied or issued something, and she was threatened with jail. Now, these kids get on social media, they pose with their knives. If you can track a 60-year-old woman who was a bit stupid and angry and said something injudicious on social media, how the hell can't you track these kids down? They pose with their knives. look at the kid in Manchester. He came from a respectable middle-class family, and he was killed, and his parents said it was awful. And then you find he's posing on social media pretending to be a gangster. He set the target on his back.
Yeah.
It was a challenge to everybody. And the police, if they can pick up somebody for a non-crime hate incident, and usually it's a 70-year-old woman who gets a visit from three policemen, why the hell can't they pick up these?
I know, and that is the thing, and they do monitor. And again, there's an incredible amount of money that is spent, monitoring. I wrote a piece this summer about, monitoring sort of drill rappers and taking things down. There's, gosh, like over £1 million just for the Met Police to do it in London. There's so much going on, and yet so many kids being missed. What do you think? If there's one thing that we could do that would mean that we didn't see, children killing children, what would it be?
Because they're culturally protected, as soon as you look at the particular ethnic group, the scream goes up, racial profiling. Well, forgive me, but when you look at most of these kids who have gone to jail, who are in court for stabbing, it's not difficult to see where their ethnicity lies. And to use that as a cover is just disgraceful. And politicians are rubbish at it. Do you remember Blair? Oh, we'll take them straight to the nearest ATM and find them on the spot. Until somebody said, well, you can't do that legally. You could say, if we catch you with a knife, you go to jail.
Yeah. But also, do you remember that it was about and also the amount of the fine? It's like, Tony Blair, a lot of these people don't have that money in their bank. They weren't born rich and go to private school like you. They literally don't understand how normal people live. My big worry is there are a lot of kids who, again, we say, well, they were wrong, and like the 14-year-old who was stabbed on the bus, he'd carried a knife himself. He was a threat to himself, he's a threat to others, but fundamentally, I think he was also a victim of our own failures.
Yeah, but Philip will appreciate this. I'm from a Special Forces background, and he will be familiar with CQB and dealing with people in unarmed combat.
Yeah.
The fact is, if you've got a knife and you can't use it, you might as well give up. Because the moment you bring out a knife, if somebody is more determined and more skillful,
it's a risk to you.
Dead.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to have to leave it there. John, thank you so much for your call. Really, really appreciate that. We're going to go to a quick break. Up next, we are going to be talking to the journalist Charlie Bentley Astor. She's been investigating what really was on Axel Krubanis' his actual computer. And a lot of it suggests what his real motivation might have been for those awful, awful killings in Southport. Do stay tuned for that. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:33 is the time. At 11 o'clock, we will be getting the sentencing of Axel Rudikabana at Liverpool Crown Court. That will take some time, maybe some hours. We're going to hear more background about the 18-year-old. We're going to hear more details about the case, stuff that obviously would have come out in the court case had he not pleaded guilty on Monday on the very first morning of that supposedly 4-week trial. We're also going to be hearing victim statements from families and much more besides. Before that, I want to talk to Charlie Bentley Astor. She's a writer and author who has been looking very closely at this case since these awful attacks on the 29th of July. And Charlie joins us right now. A very good morning to you.
Thank you very much for having me on, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I've been following what you've been writing on social media and your Substack, and it's been very interesting. You're one of the few journalists actually looking into a lot of the background. Now, a lot of stuff couldn't have been written, of course, and couldn't be public until, of course, we had that guilty plea, or in the other case, there had been a trial, a guilty verdict. And a lot has been talked about what the motives are for this man. Under 18 when he committed the crimes, but 18 now. And we've had the Prime Minister talking about, well, you know, it wasn't necessarily terrorism, but we could redefine terrorism. And you know, although he had an Al-Qaeda training manual, he didn't necessarily, sign up to the Al-Qaeda Islamist narrative, and he was obsessed with violence, with genocide. But some of the detail that you've looked at from what has been released from the officials suggests that there was a particular obsession with effectively white genocide here in the UK. Tell us what you found.
Yes, as you say, Julia, there's been a very eclectic set of horrifying sources which he had on multiple electronic devices in his home. And this has led to much confusion as to exactly what his motivations are. And police have yet to declare one. And Rudikabana himself has yet to declare one. However, if you begin to look at the actual names of some of these documents he had in his house, as you say, there is like an almost ethnic cleansing fixation, a genocide fixation towards white Anglo-colonialists. So if I read you just a couple of the titles, we have the Mau Mau War, British counterinsurgency in colonial Kenya, the death and survival during the Rwandan genocide, and obviously that's related to Germany's occupation of the region, and examinations of punishments dealt to slaves, rebels in the 18th century British plantation societies. So there is this kind of emphasis on black and, quote, indigenous people.
Yeah, I mean, bearing in mind, of course, the background that although he's born in Cardiff, as we famously know, he was born to Rwandan migrants who, Rwanda had suffered the most horrific war and horrific genocide.
Yes, exactly. So there's some ambiguity about exactly who his parents are and what their role in Rwanda and the genocide it was or was not.
Some questions about whether or not the father had been involved in one of the fighting forces.
Exactly. So there's some ambiguity about whether they're just straight up victims who try to flee into neighbouring countries and then manage to get asylum into the UK, as some people did, or whether he was in fact taking part on the Tutsi side. And there's some ambiguity about what exactly his role was. Was he just a person on the ground moving stuff around? Mm-hmm. Was he carrying a weapon? Was he leading people? We don't know how close he was to senior officials.
No, indeed. And this is the thing, when we're talking about this man can't be a terrorist because he doesn't follow a particular ideology. He's not, far right, fascist, Nazi, a white supremacist. He's not an Islamist. But the fact that he had said in school on a number of occasions, apparently he told schoolmates, Britain needs genocide like Rwanda. At a football match at school, he talked about the need for a white genocide in Britain. Now, these may have been among a number of different remarks that he'd made. We know that his obsession with violence, beheadings, horrific scenes and genocide had been long known to the authorities, referred to Prevent again and again, stuff he'd said to school, his parents and others. But as you say, there does appear to be a bit more of a theme than perhaps the officials have suggested to us. And given their unwillingness to give us information, even about things found in his home, quite in contrast to the amount of information given to us about other suspected killers at the time. Thomas Mayer, in the case of Jo Cox, 2 days after her horrific murder, we knew everything that was in his home. Oh, we knew about all the books he'd ordered, that he was, he was far right, that he, that he was obsessed with Nazi memorabilia. We knew all that. That apparently wouldn't prejudice his trial, and it didn't. He was convicted a few months later. But apparently us even knowing about the Al-Qaeda manual, the ricin, apparently that would have prejudiced this man's trial, which I think a lot of people find quite perplexing.
Yeah, it's not right. If you look at, it kind of doesn't matter what the political motivation for a terror attack has been. Obviously, the majority of terror attacks in this country are Islamic in motivation. But even when we've seen sort of quote far-right neo-Nazi inspired attacks, again, they've been declared within almost like the same day, and if not the same day, at least like a couple days later.
Sometimes within hours.
Hours. Well, and this is the thing. Keir Starmer was not concerned when he took to a national stage and said that all of these rioters were far right and that they were members of the EDL. You could say that that was certainly prejudicing proceedings by declaring their guilt before they had come before a court. So there's a kind of hypocrisy there in Starmer's attitude.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you could argue that the stakes are higher in this case, but anyone who's going to lose a family member by going into prison for an extended amount of time, and someone who's going to have their life potentially ruined by that experience, it matters. And yes, as you say, there's some confusion as to why this hasn't come out, at least some details sooner.
Oh, exactly. And it does strike me that if we did have, and let's bring it down to basics, because we know what we're talking about and we don't pussyfoot around these things here at Talk.
Yes.
If this was a white man who had been accused and is now obviously pleaded guilty to these killings, and it had been black or Asian children who had been stabbed, who had been targeted in a class and had been stabbed, I think that we would already have known, and I think it would have been made clear, I think within days of that crime being committed in Southport, that this man had an obsession with genocide of black children or Asian children or anti-Muslim sentiment or whatever it was. I think we would have been told about that. I think they'd have been happy to push that, and that would have been all over the news, and no one would have worried about that affecting the fairness of any future trial. I think the rules are different when the concern is the other way around. Do you think that is possibly the case?
Do you know what, this is the feeling of some of the family members. They've said to me, expressly, like, we feel like if this had been a white supremacist attack against, Muslim children or a group of black children, that this would have been over pretty much within a few weeks. And we would have heard every sordid detail that there would to be known about this. So as with the grooming gangs, there is this kind of suspicious air to it. Are you keeping stuff back simply because this individual is black and comes from an immigrant background? We know that a Danish study shows that second-generation immigrants are almost more prone to crime than their parents who arrive here because of identity-related issues.
And we've seen that with me.
We're not allowed to say this.
Yeah, but we've seen that with things like Shamima Begum and people like that. People, born and bred here, why on earth, but feeling that this Britain isn't their home. When you say you've spoken to family members, is that members of the family? We can hope we can hear, we think, some of the victim impact statements from the family members. And of course, the three little girls, BB King, Elsie Dot Stankham and Alice De Silva Aguero, we know their names, the 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 9-year-old who were killed. The other 8 children, we don't know their names. They're being protected. Their family members obviously can't be identified. Have you spoken to those who lost their children and those who have had children who were brutally injured? And tell us a bit more detail what they've been saying to you.
So I've not spoken to any of the families who have directly lost a child. The way that, so I'm not seeking these families out, I'm simply speaking on social media and they're coming to me. And so as you can imagine, the families who have lost their children are so overwhelmed that they obviously couldn't be trolling through social media. But the parents who have children who survived, who have been maimed badly by this killer, are angry. They're expressing, they expressed concerns about the fact that they weren't there when Rudy Cabana changed his plea. They were taken. This was a very sort of shocking change. Even the solicitors around the family weren't expecting this. They did not have time to get to the court that morning to hear this, and that might have been their only opportunity to hear this monster speak.
Yeah,
it's just that.
Do any of those loved ones of the children, as you say? I mean, I think people often, they always talk about the 3 children who died, which is just unbelievably appalling. But there were 8 children living with this for the rest of their lives and their families. Did those families who did get in touch with you, did they say suggest that they think that, and as you mentioned, this would have been very different if it had been the other way round, for want of a better phrase? Did they feel that there has been a cover-up? Do they feel that they're not getting the full story still?
That's why they've reached out to me, because they feel like they're being lied to. Obviously, they've been given some information by the police just before they were supposed to go to this first day of the trial. They watched some of the body cam footage of police arriving on the scene. They wouldn't have been shown that if the trial wasn't going ahead. So This was a very snap decision. But because this is not all going to be aired in trial, there's actually going to be quite a lot that they're not going to get to hear.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be working with them and others in the local community to try and get at these details so that they can learn as much as they want to learn.
Absolutely. Well, look, I really appreciate you joining us. I know you want to go and watch the sentencing. Charlie Bentley-Astor, who's a journalist and author, you've done some fantastic work on this. Really appreciate you joining us, and I hope we'll come on the show again. Thank you for that. Philip Ingram, it's really interesting to hear from Charlie. I really do think that, I think a lot of people feel, the rules are different depending on the colour of the perpetrator and the victim, and that needs to stop.
Yeah. Well, and I've just checked the CPS definition of terrorism and what falls into it, and everything that Charlie has described falls firmly into the bracket of terrorism. And it is trying to influence a government or international government organisation or intimidate the public. He intended to intimidate the public. He had his extreme anti-white genocide comments that he put out, and advance political, religious, racial or an ideological cause. Well, racial and ideological fall into
Definitely
that.
fit into those
It falls
categories.
into the definition of terrorism. There's no ifs, buts, maybes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for that, Philip. 10:45 is the time. Appreciate your reaction to that. Do give us a call 0344 499 1000. That information that Charlie Bentley-Astor has got. Also, obviously, we're approaching the sentencing. We're going to be talking about that throughout the show of Axel Rudy Cabana. We're also up next going to be talking about why there are Russian spy ships looking at our undersea cables. What are they planning to do, and what is Britain planning to do about it? We'll talk to a former British diplomat and, of course, Philip Ingram about that. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Ian, I woke up this morning. I never got bed till 3 o'clock this morning because last night I saw that a 12-year-old child had been stabbed to death. 12-year-old child, one of the youngest in recent times in Birmingham. I woke up this morning 4 hours later and I spent an hour posting on all the stabbing murders around Britain. There was even a girl that was raped, for example, in Hampshire. This is how serious crime is out of vogue. She was abducted at knife point by two 14-year-old boys.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:49 is the time. We'll all be going to obviously see the Axel Rubalcaba sentencing that's going to be starting at 11. We're not expecting the actual sentence to be handed down until probably about 12:30, actually, realistically. There's going to be witness statements and victim impact statements. We're going to hear a lot from the judge. We'll bring you everything we hear from the judge and from the court at Liverpool Crown Court as we get it here at Talk. In the meantime, let's talk about Russia. Russia in Ukraine and Russian ships, for some reason, patrolling British waters. What are they doing there? Well, let's talk about all this with Tim Willesee. He's a former British diplomat and visiting professor at the Department of War Studies at King's College London. A very good morning to you, Tim.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. First of all, I just want to talk about where we are in terms of Putin and Ukraine, because Donald Trump has made it very clear he wants the war in Ukraine to be over. I mean, I think he said he was going to end it on day one. Hasn't quite happened that way, and no one took that very seriously. But yesterday he warned Putin that he faces higher taxes, tariffs and sanctions if Russia does not sign up to a deal to end the war in Ukraine. How likely do you think that those sort of threats will work?
Well, in one sense, I'm quite encouraged, actually, because we'd all been worrying that Trump was rather more sympathetic to Putin than we would like, really. And therefore, the rather brusque and demanding nature of his demand suggests he's not. But on the other hand, you know, I'm not suggesting we want to be nice to Putin, but we want to get what we want. And if Trump wants a deal, this isn't a good way of getting a deal, because you know, Putin's got an enhanced view of Russia's power in the world, and he won't like being demanded in this sort of fashion.
We sort of need to give him something that he feels looks like a win. I mean, that's kind of terrible optics for the world and indeed for the Russian people. But is that what we need to do?
No, I don't think it's that. It's just I don't think that at all. In fact, we mustn't give him a win. He doesn't deserve a win. He deserves the catastrophe that he has caused. But I just think the way that you reach out to him, this isn't probably the way to do it, because he'll feel humiliated in front of his public if he goes back and says, OK, I'm prepared to talk.
Right.
So I just don't think it was a particularly, in diplomatic terms, a particularly good way of reaching out to him.
That's very interesting. But of course, we know a lot of the sanctions, the tariffs and all of that. I mean, there's been no trade between America and Russia for many years. I mean, it was Europe that was mostly hit by, the reliance on Russian oil and gas. But actually, you know, Russia's just been selling its oil and gas to other countries, you know, India and China. And by the way, we're buying a load of it back through India anyway. It hasn't hit Russia as hard as many hoped it would hit. But the Russian economy is kind of on its knees. Huge numbers of Russian men have been lost in the Ukrainian war or injured, I mean, the hundreds of thousands. Do you think there is any likelihood that Putin and Zelensky could come to, I mean, I don't think I like the word deal really, but some sort of arrangement which could at least stop the killing? And do you think that's possible, that could happen without Russian forces being ousted from Ukrainian territory?
Well, you're right about sanctions. They've been very ineffective, and I think, you know, Trump rather gives the impression that Putin is isolated. I mean, Putin is not isolated. In October, he hosted the BRICS summit, in which 36 world leaders were present. And when you think of India and China being there, that's almost half the world population, you know, before you started. So this idea that we have that Putin is isolated is completely wrong. My worry, Julia, is that Putin actually won't want a deal. At the moment, he's making progress. It's slow and bloody progress. And your point about the economy and their losses is right. But, we only have to look back to the 1940s to see the amazing punishment the Russian economy and the Russian people can take.
Yeah.
And,
well, the Russian people don't get a say, do they? I mean, they're not going to be able to vote Putin out.
They don't get a say. They don't get a say at all. Yeah. So Putin may just think, well, actually, I'm doing fine at the moment. I'm gaining ground currently by the meter rather than the kilometer. But that might change because, Ukraine is short of manpower. Europe has not really stepped up to support it in the way it should have done. Yeah. And he might just think, if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, indeed. Can I also ask you, just briefly, and I will come to Philip on this as well. We've had a statement from the Defence Secretary, John Healey, saying that Britain will not shy away from robust action. This after a Royal Navy submarine sent a warning to a Russian spy ship seen loitering for quite some time near vital British undersea cables. HMS Astute, a nuclear-powered submarine, surfaced close to the Yantar to inform the crew they were being watched during the incident. This was back in November. Now, just... I want to know, why, what is the purpose of Russian naval vessels monitoring our undersea cables, and what sort of robust action would we be able to take?
Well, this sort of Russian stuff goes on it's standard practice. It goes on the whole time. The undersea cables have been identified as a big vulnerability for the West for a long time. And in fact, some really serious cables have already been severed between Scandinavia and the Baltic states. So we, by which I mean particularly Europe, but also NATO, has been pretty slow on this, actually. Yeah. We've allowed some serious cables to be severed. And so this one incident, and about a submarine surfacing and warning off the thing, it makes us feel good, but it does slightly cover up the fact that we've been pretty slow. Yeah. And we should have been abreast of this much, much earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim Wallacey, we'll see. I really appreciate you joining us, former British diplomat now at King's College London. Thank you for your time. Come back to you, Philip Ingram, as a former senior military intelligence officer yourself. Just start with me, first of all, on these cables, because my big worry here is that we are relying more and more on imported energy to keep our electricity going when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine most of winter. We don't produce enough electricity. We're importing gas-powered electricity or nuclear-powered electricity from whether it's Norway or from the continent, or from France. That comes through those cables. If those are severed, and we saw what happened to Nord Stream 2, the severing of that gas link to Germany at the beginning of the Ukraine war. I mean, we don't have access to that electricity, which we can't produce ourselves. This is a serious concern. This is basic infrastructure that could be under attack.
Oh, it's critical infrastructure, critical national infrastructure, and it's not just electricity. It's all of our interconnectivity. Everything we get in the internet comes through these cables and connects us around the world. But this is something that we've known about for 111 years. Yeah. The British were the first to attack cables as the opening aggressive act of the First World War. Yeah. We knew about Russian spy ships coming around the coast and all the rest of it during the Cold War. And then when the Cold War finished, we took our eye off the ball. And now we're suddenly realising that the Russians actually never stopped. And as we've laid more and more cables, we've become more reliant on the interconnectivity, whether it be for power or for data. They've been mapping this. We started to see Russian aggressive action destroying cables, and we're going, oh my goodness, we need to do something.
And at the same time, we are relying more and more on those cables for everything, all of our needs. I mean, again, it's insane.
Yeah,
it's genuinely insane.
From a military perspective, if you wanted to have an impact on a country before you carried out further military action,
also with plausible deniability.
Exactly.
You cut
all their connectivity, and that's so easy to do because these are single points of failure. There's not that many of them around the coast.
Half of Britain goes into blackout. Our gas power stations, the nuclear power stations are all going downhill and going to be closed down.
And you then can't react to what's going on inside the country and threats that are coming in. The emergency generators for our air defence radars won't be enough, and we can't communicate with the fighter jets to get them sent off to where the threat's coming from.
I mean, this is such basic stuff. Yeah. This is such an abject failure by the state and by Tory Labour over many decades.
Many decades.
And I say by the civil service. You're not flagging this stuff up. Yeah. If you're not the permanent secretary, Department of Energy or Business or Defence, and in the Downing Street, and you're not going, Prime Minister, this is stuff you need to deal with to keep this country basically safe. If you're not doing that, you should be out on your ear. And the politicians, they should be listening to people like you who know this stuff. This is surely the Chief of the Defence Staff is saying this stuff to the Prime Minister.
Well, no, the Defence Chiefs, unfortunately, spend too much time pampering from a political perspective to the ministers, and the ministers are driven by what number 10, number 11 are saying.
And polishing their medals.
The strategic defence review that's happening in the minute is not going to turn around and come out and say we need to spend lots more money on dealing with this, and number 11 is going to say, Rachel Reeves is going to say, fantastic, it's really important we deal with this threat because we know it's going to take us 10 years to build this capability.
Exactly, and again, Russia's been doing this. They spend a huge amount of money on their military, and again, this idea, oh well, America are going to protect us. I mean, you really cannot rely on that, especially Donald Trump, in charge. And as he's quite rightly said, about time Europeans looked after their own defences. I think that's perfectly reasonable. I just find it absolutely extraordinary that we've made ourselves so vulnerable to this. But also, again, when we talk about robust action, what robust action? I mean, again, if we'd been invaded by Russia, we'd have run out of ammunition on day 3. Yeah, that's how robust we can be.
The submarine surfacing was robust action because that will have
They would have expected to have been watched anyway.
Yes, but
shoot the ship out. You've got 10 minutes to go. That's robust action. We'd have World War III under me. This is true. Philip Ingram, big thanks to you for that. Just to let you know, Axel Rudabakana has arrived at Liverpool Crown Court where he's due to be sentenced. Judge's remarks starting very, very soon. It's likely to take probably about an hour and a half or longer. We'll bring you all the updates on what's said, victim statements and the like. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Do stay tuned. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and you are with Talk, the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, great to have your company. Also the company of Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer, joining us for the whole show. Just to let you know, of course, that the Axel Rudikabana sentencing is taking place in Liverpool Crown Court. Just a few moments ago, the killer did arrive at court in a prison van with escort, of course, and we are expecting that sentencing. We're going to be hearing more details about the events on the 29th of July in Southport that led to the deaths of three little girls, BB King, Elsie Adat Stankum and Alistair Silva Aguirre, and also the brutal stabbings of 8 other little children and also 2 adults. 16 charges in total that Axel Rudikabana pleaded guilty to only on Monday at the start of what we thought would be a 4-week trial. We're also going to be hearing victim impact statements from some of the parents, and we are going to be hopefully hearing a little bit more about Axel Rudikabana's background. We heard some interesting information earlier on from one of our guests about, frankly, just what he was looking at, what his motives could have been. We're told there was no individual motive other than obsession with genocide. Certainly suggests that some of the documents suggest that actually it was a motivation was, possibly white genocide, an obsession with Britain's colonial past, and how Britain, statements he'd made to fellow pupils at school before he was expelled for violence about the need for white genocide in this country. Fascinating words. We know also that the father of a victim of the Southport stabbings has called for Axel Rudikabana to rot in jail. He urged the judge to show no mercy to the 18-year-old when he faces, we know, a life sentence today, but of course minimum term will be completely up to the judge. The government must do more on deportations, many are saying, after new reports suggest that more than 1 million people are illegally living in the UK. London, home to as many as 600,000. That's equivalent to 1 in 12 people currently living in the capital city of our country here illegally, arriving on a tourist visa, a work visa, or a student visa, and just staying on and living here. Absolutely extraordinary. We can't do anything about the migrants coming over on boats, can't do anything, it would appear, about those staying here illegally. What on earth is going on? Plus, the Prime Minister has promised to override what he calls the whims of NIMBYs, with plans to curb legal challenges against major building projects in order to boost economic growth. Of course, that be, railways, power plants, airports, runways. But what will he do when that inevitably conflicts with his legal net zero commitments, which he says are absolutely the most important thing? Growth or net zero? It's an either or, Prime Minister. We're going to be talking about all of that coming up. As I say, Philip Ingram is here. And Philip, obviously so many stories in the news. There's so much going on internationally. What's happening in America with Donald Trump? Oh, there's so much going on. But we know that everyone right now has got their eyes glued on what is going on at Liverpool Crown Court as Mr Justice Goose, Judge Mr Justice Goose, is going to be delivering his sentencing remarks for Axel Rudikabana, 18 years old, 17 when he committed those awful, awful crimes in Southport last July. It sparked a series of riots, much anguish, not just among the families of those children and their loved ones, but also among the Southport community, but also across the country. We've now got, hundreds of people behind bars of rioting that resulted from people's anger about those killings, but also, of course, the incredible lies, absolute lies that were spread online in the sort of massive vacuum of information that we had. We know that, the parents, the family members are going to give their statements. We don't know whether we're going to get those to play live here or not, whether they're going to be read by a judge or the camera's taken off. Obviously, anonymity of the families of those children who are still alive, thankfully. That is being protected. But, what should happen to Axel Rudikabana?
Well, I think he should be, life should mean life, but unfortunately, because he was, under 18 or under 21, it's not going to be that. He should be given the maximum term that the judge can give under the law. If there was some way of making sure that he never saw the light of day again, I think that would be even too little a punishment.
I just don't understand why anyone even thinks this is. I think, frankly, for one, if he killed one child. The thing is, he didn't. It wasn't the attempted murder of 8 children as well. It was the entire class. Yeah. If he could have killed 20 children, he would have. when you enter something, he was stabbing children running away in the back, for God's sake. I often think these charges aren't even, don't even really sort of portray the full horror of the crime that was committed at that time. Do the motivations matter? I mean, it does matter for sentencing, because we have hate crimes. So if it's done for a particular, if you're motivated because of someone's race or ethnicity, that you get a tougher sentence.
The motivations don't matter to the victims and the families of the victims, because they're dead or they've been injured and are hopefully recovering, but you'll never completely recover through life. The motivations matter for the way that something is then investigated, and making sure that there aren't loopholes in the law to deal with individuals at the highest possible, with the severest possible penalties. And this is why, as we heard from Charlie Bentley Astor earlier, he could have been motivated by white genocide. That in itself could lead to further terrorist acts on the behalf.
Indeed. I mean, that's the thing. Some of the sources he'd been looking at, some of the things online, obsessed with genocide, obsessed with beheadings and violence. Yes, he had this Al Qaeda manual, which in itself is a terror offence, to possess that manual. But he was also obsessed with ethnic cleansing, and I say genocide specifically, but particularly it was white genocide. He had said to schoolmates in the classroom, at football matches, talked about how Britain needed genocide like Rwanda. Of course, that's where his family members were from. His parents came over from Rwanda, sought asylum here after horrific genocide that took, horrendous numbers of lives there. Talked about white genocide. Now, again, as we were talking with the journalist Charlie Bentley Astor, who's been looking in great detail in this case over the months, I do just think the rules are different. And if this had been a white man, and the children who'd been targeted had been black children. Now, I don't know whether he would have known what colour the children would be in this dance class, but we've certainly seen those pictures of those who have been killed, and they were all white. I can't believe we wouldn't have been given different information.
No, we would have been, because if that it had happened that way round and black children were targeted because of their race, then that falls into the definition of terrorism. Terrorism morphs, and therefore white genocide is something that we haven't heard of before. I certainly haven't heard that described. But it is something that could easily come along. And if with that level of detail coming out, again, that could stimulate people going, oh, there's another cause to hang my hat on. So we have to be really careful about the labels. But it's important we understand and put the resources to.
But there's the whole thing about sort of the racism debate. It's always white people against ignoring racism in every culture and racism in every race against different races for different reasons. It exists everywhere. It is sadly, otherness has often been met in this way. But again, so much of the leftist teaching on this is an obsession with white people, always bad, white supremacists, racists, black people, Asian people, people of every other background, always victims of white racism. When, of course, people have been subjugated, slaves with ethno basis to it by every single culture in time, in the history of the universe. It is extraordinary, and there's clear, blatant racism among different groups, ethnic groups, non-white groups. I'm not never try and be PC, but I just don't want to say anything that could be accused of stirring anything up. But when everyone pretends that things aren't as they are, I think it's really insulting.
I can bring two examples in. I've suffered white-on-white racism. I've got
as an Irishman.
I've got Northern Irish accent, so I've seen that. My ex-father-in-law was Indian, and I can say this now because he's dead. He was exceptionally racist against anyone that was black, in particular those that were Afro-Caribbean. And oh my goodness, the language that he used, the way he described individuals, and he was a doctor.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. No one likes to face up to reality on this. I wonder how relevant this is. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but particularly asking, in the wake of the Southport attack, there's no point me asking what sentence do you think Axel Rudiger-Cabana should get. I mean, I think we all know we want him to come out of prison in a box. End of. Full stop. Sorry, I don't understand. When they got rid of the death penalty, which I am not in favour of, I know a lot of people in our audience are in favour of, I'd be intensely unbothered in this scenario, as I've said. However, we got rid of the death penalty, but the deal with the British public on that was that people served life. I don't think you should call it life if it isn't for your life. I think that's an insult. And it's bad enough when someone gets sentenced to 10 years, and then only serves 5 or even less. I mean, bad enough some of the actual sentencing we get for things. And we've had a bunch of the grooming rape gangs who were sentenced earlier this week. I mean, again, there's been so many other stories, Trump and Southport. We haven't got to all the stories we wanted to get to this week. And they were getting, for repeated rape of an underage girl, they're getting like 4 or 5 years. I mean, it's a beep, 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 beep insult. I mean, it's just outrageous, that sort of sentence. That's not a, oh, he said, she said, he's sort of, date rapey, what really happened, was she drunk? I mean, we're talking about blatant rape of a child and getting those sort of sentences and then being out in half. I don't understand why anyone would think that we don't need to change the law to say crimes like this, especially when there's a guilty plea, when, the guy... he was caught red-handed. He was covered in blood with the knife. I mean, come on. There's not we got some DNA 10 years later. We think it might be him. There are miscarriages of justice. But in these cases, I don't think that. It's just nothing up for discussion for me. He comes out in a box and he doesn't come out at all. He could be out on the streets in 20 years. Yeah. I mean, we're going to find out what his minimum sentence is. But because he was 17 at the time of the attacks. Yeah,
and it's disgusting. I am, under our current legal system, not a fan of the death penalty because it's what can be proven beyond reasonable doubt rather than what is certain, but where you've got a degree of certainty. And if I think there should be another court that can take beyond reasonable doubt and get it into certainty. And then I'm a fan for the death penalty. I don't think the taxpayer should pay for him to be on this planet for the rest of his life. Yeah, very interesting. Although of course we know that all the appeals end up actually probably costing a lot more. But I want to hear from you. If you want to comment on all of this, please do. You're always welcome to get in touch. But I specifically want to ask, after the Southport attack, and not just that attack, with an under 18 stabbing to death little children. 2 recent fatal stabbings of children, a 14-year-old stabbed to death in a cold blood. Yeah, he was a gangland member, but, I'm not taking away responsibility from that child, but he was carrying a knife the day before. I mean, but stabbed to death on a bus in South London. In Birmingham on Tuesday, a 12-year-old stabbed to death and a 14-year-old has been arrested as the suspect. How do we tackle knife crime? I just don't know how long we're just going to say this is normal. This cannot be allowed to be normal in our country. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Get in touch by text on 87222. Send a message to us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1 standard network rate message. Let's also talk about these extraordinary figures found from Telegraph, got them from Thames Water, who commissioned a study to find out, well, how much water do we need in around the country? How many more people are in the country? Turns out there's basically about 1 million. They guesstimate around 1 million people living in this country who are illegal migrants. That's their best guess. I think that's a woeful underestimate. Yep. My guess is it's at least double that. But 1 in 12 people in London, almost 600,000 people living in London, the capital city of our country right now, they believe is an illegal migrant. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the reasons why I think these figures are completely out of kilter with the reality is that when we started saying when people from the EU post-Brexit, can you please sign up? If you've been here for years, that's absolutely fine, you can stay. No one ever talked about deporting people from the EU, but we need you to sign up so we know you are, blah, blah. Turned out, they thought it was 3.7 million. Turned out there were 5.7 million. Mm-hmm. There were 2 million people living here, had no reason to go under the radar. Why would they? Because they were here legally, mm-hmm. Okay? 2 million more people living in this country than the authorities knew about. Yeah. Illegal migrants, people who come here on a tourist visa, on a work visa, on a student visa, who've overstayed, many for years, decades even. What are the odds we have any idea? I mean, it is astonishing. We're in the same situation as America. We've no idea whatsoever who's here. We've no idea whatsoever who's claiming benefits. We've no idea whatsoever who's using our resources. We've no idea whatsoever who's blocking all of the accommodation that's out there that we need for people in this country. And until we come up with some way in the country of making sure that people can identify that they are...
Oh, Tony Blair's got an idea. What was Tony Blair's idea? We all carry digital ID. But I don't understand why we'd need to do... I mean, it seems to me... I remember hiring a nanny when my daughter... I went back to work when she was 7 months old. I had a nanny, shared a nanny with another friend from my antenatal classes. And she's wonderful, this girl, absolutely wonderful. And I said, sorry, where are you actually from? You're Eastern European. And there were no British women who replied to the ad, by the way, paying good wages, all legal, paying tax, full works. No British women applied. Don't know what they were all doing. And she's absolutely wonderful. And then I can't remember which country she was from, but it was outside the EU. And I went, do you have a work permit? And she went, no. And I went, I can't. And I was political editor of a national newspaper, but even if it was, I can't hire you. You're illegal. You're not allowed to work. And, you're by far the best candidate. You're not allowed to work. I mean, I'm sure she went on and got a job somewhere else with someone who wasn't doing it on the books. But, there are so many people. But you just asked for ID. But how are these people living? Someone must surely be asking for their ID.
Well, they should do. Legally, they should do. But the trouble is there isn't a common form of ID in this country. And this is why people can scam getting driving licence, can scam the system for benefits, can scam the system for use of the NHS.
But hold on a minute. You're saying none of the... Look, they have ID cards in virtually every European country. It's absolutely the norm. OK, France, Germany, places like that. They still have exactly the same problems.
No, they have less of a problem when it comes in. Germany, I lived in Germany for 13 years. If you moved into a different town or city in Germany, you were required to go down to the local council offices and register your address.
And if you don't
do that, you don't get benefits. You don't get housing. You get a police visit. And you.
But if they don't know you're there, how will they know?
Because there are so many other ways. You have to provide identity for everything. So you can't get a mobile... over here, you can go into a supermarket, you get a mobile phone, you can put a SIM card in it. In Germany, in the Netherlands, and all the rest of it, you can't unless you give your identity across. And that, a government... confirmed identity card.
And not like just a piece of paper, something equivalent to a passport or driving licence, something official. Here's the thing. I happen to know some teenagers, wink wink, who for a number of years have been able to go to the pub with their fake driving licences. I've looked at those fake driving licences. By the way, round my way, it's £57 for two. Okay, order it en masse to get a group discount. It's that organised. Okay. I would defy anybody to be able to tell whether that was a real or a fake driving licence.
If you had a national identity card that had a chip in it, it's more difficult to fake, and you had a chip reader or something that's in there to be able to prove your identity.
And on one level, I think, that is the obvious answer. Again, when I was to, when I was in younger years, you get a video out of Blockbusters, you had to show loads of ID, proof of address. Okay, but here's the thing. I no longer trust the government. I was much more, well, if you've got nothing to hide, got nothing to fear. I was that person. The last few years have convinced me I absolutely have something to fear from the state. And my privacy and the need... We've got criminality, but the need to prevent criminality, I think, should never override the civil rights of the law-abiding.
And therefore, we've got the Information Commissioner, we've got other mechanisms of making sure that the data isn't abused. If you want to track someone, if the government wants to track you, it can track you today. If the government wants to read your WhatsApp tweets or look at your personal photographs on your telephone, they can do it today under the law. This would provide an extra level of security. That means that they're not having to use...
Here's the thing, though.
Thousands of pounds worth of assets to do that.
Here's the thing. If they found these people, they went, oh, look, everyone working at this car wash or at this nail bar or frankly, the Deliveroo drivers and Uber Eats drivers, all fake ID or whatever they're doing. If they found those people and then they were, within a week, deported from the country, that would be worth doing. But you and I both know they wouldn't be.
Well, exactly. They wouldn't be deported. I used to live in Bedfordshire, and very near the top secret military base that there was a vegetable processing plant. That vegetable processing plant used to get raided by immigration on a regular basis because they used illegal immigrants working in the plant, and they would be taken away to an immigration centre which wasn't secure, supposedly to be thrown out of the country, but they just leave and just wander around again.
So it's all a bit pointless, really. We need a little bit of Trumpism, a little bit of rounding up and bye-bye. That's what we need.
But if you had an identity card and couldn't do anything in life without proving it, I go into a supermarket and I complain I don't get age checked because I'm so close.
No, but hold on a minute. No, but people are required. Employers are required to find whether you're legally entitled to work. Landlords aren't allowed to rent to you, but we know, but it still happens. They still find somewhere to live.
Yes,
we know that because there are at least 1 million, probably 2 million of them.
But you were a potential employer who turned around and said, I can't employ you. Yeah. But you then turned around and said, but it would have been very easy. Most people don't do that. Yeah, no. If there was then penalties for people using illegal ID cards for illegally employing people, the penalties have to come into them. You have to back that up with penalties.
Well, there we are then. That's a whole other topic, which frankly we could have done 3 hours on this topic on a normal day. But just to let you know that the hearing, the sentencing of Axel Rudiger Barnett was due to have started at 11 o'clock. Court is filling up. Proceedings have been slightly delayed as people file into the courtroom. Rudiger Barnett himself did arrive just before 11 o'clock in a police van. We'll keep you updated on all developments, what goes on in court. Up next, we're going to take your phone calls. 0344 499 1000. Going to be talking about how do we tackle knife crime in the wake of Southport, the stabbings of 2 children in London and Birmingham in just the last week. Do give us a call. This is Talk.
Ian, I woke up this morning. I never got bed till 3 o'clock this morning because last night I saw that a 12-year-old child had been stabbed to death. 12-year-old child, one of the youngest in recent times in Birmingham. I woke up this morning 4 hours later and I spent an hour posting on all the stabbing murders around Britain. There was even a girl that was raped, for example, in Hampshire. This is how serious crime is out of world. She was abducted at knife point by two 14-year-old boys.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for your company. Philip Ingram's also still with me, just to keep you up to date what is happening at Liverpool Crown Court today. Axel Rudabakana has arrived at court about half an hour ago in a police van, ready to be sentenced for the horrific, fatal stabbings of 3 little girls, B.B. King, Elsie Dotz-Dankum, Alice da Silva Aguera, and 8 other children who were also stabbed. That's attempted murder charge he pleaded guilty to, and also the stabbings of attempted murder of 2 adults. 16 charges in total, including the Al-Qaeda manual, the ricin in possession in his home. He pleaded guilty on Monday, of course. He is being sentenced today. Now, the proceedings were due to start at 11. They are running late. Lots of people wanting to file into the court, family members, of course. We are going to be getting victim statements from the families. We are going to be hearing a little bit more detail about Axel Rudabakana's life, what might have motivated him. We hope we will find out more on that, but also the events on the day of that awful, awful crime on the 29th of July last year. There are no cameras or audio being allowed until 12:30 when we will get the actual sentencing by the judge. I think much of that is about protecting the identity of the family members who are, many of whom are other family members of the 8 little girls who were injured, some of them very severely in that stabbing, whose identity is being protected. So that may well be the reason why, but we'll bring you any details we get out of the court as soon as we get them. Let's go to your phone calls now in the wake of that Southport attack and recent fatal stabbings of children, with suspected, in some cases, by other children in London and Birmingham. How do we tackle knife crime? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let me get some of your messages coming in on text and social media. Charlie says it's simple: crack down on stop and search. Well, I mean more stop and search. Joe says we need to use technology. We need a real cross-parliamentary debate in action. Yeah, you know what? Time for debate's over, mate. We need to reach out to all communities. We need to encourage good parenting. And finally, enforce the law. Yeah, enforce the law would be good, wouldn't it? Harry says harsher sentences and much more active police presence on the streets. Sally says it's more than just knife crime. The question should be, how do we tackle terrorist attacks? David says knives don't kill people. You need to tackle the ideologies and cultures that promote violent attacks using knives. Darren says massive stop and search operations, 15 years sentence for carrying a knife, whole life sentences for using a knife. Sam says fewer immigrants and longer sentences. And again, a lot of people make these points. Got plenty of our own homegrown criminals, but we do also see from certain countries, certain regions, we do see a higher rate of violent crime. I mean, it is simply a matter of fact. Joe has also got in touch, another Joe, saying it's not the knives, it's both the culture and attitude of the people using them. Gang violence has been around for years. Nothing has been done to stop it. We should be imposing much higher consequences for anyone found to be carrying or using a knife as a weapon. Let's go to the phone lines now. Angie's in Plymouth. Hello, Angie.
Hi, Julia.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me on. Fantastic show as always.
Thank you for calling. What do you want to say?
Right, OK, Prevent. I do have, sadly, personal experience of them when I was still teaching in London.
Yeah.
We had what we call CPD. I can't remember what the C is for. I could think of a few names. Professional development. And the first thing this guy from Prevent said, we were being told as teachers how to recognise any threat of terrorist attacks, etc., in our students.
Yeah.
And the first thing he stood up and said was, if you think the biggest threat of terrorism is from Islam, you are mistaken. He said the biggest threat is from the far right. That was the very first thing he said.
Absolute, I mean, completely, factually, provably, empirically untrue.
Absolutely. And that was back in, I was speaking from notes, that was in 2018. So this problem, this sort of indoctrination from the left woke, these people, has been going on for a long time. And thank God for Talk TV, who are standing up to these people, because they are lying to the nation.
And it is. Call it what it is. It's not a misinterpretation of data. No. And whenever we say stuff, and I go, well, we think this is true. I mean, if I get an Ofcom complaint, it's like, well, don't worry, I've got the official data to back it up. I mean, it's people who say things are just, you shout racist and bigot at people, and you know, for raising things. No, it is, the data is there. It's really clear. How many people have died? How many attacks? How many people involved? The numbers don't lie.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, please.
Also, going back to that horrific, and I remember because I've got 6 children, my eldest was the same age as the boys who murdered Jamie Barger, and my 5th child, David, was only 2 days older than him. He was born.
So you felt it. You know, it was in your bones.
I really did at the time. And those at that time, the law was changed so that unless you've got some disability or whatever, if you are a 10-year-old child, you know you are criminally responsible. That is the law. So I don't understand why this excuse of a human being is, we're even discussing it. We can't hang him. And I'm like you, just in case of a mistake, I'm not too happy with capital punishment, although if it'd been one of my granddaughters, I wouldn't have had a problem.
No, of course not.
You know, but he should be put away for life.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't even know. I just don't, you know, America would give him, you know, a 350-year term, because it would be, they would all run consecutively. You know, you get this much for this child's death, this much for this attempted murder. I just think we've got to get to grips on this stuff. And he could be it's perfectly likely he could be out on the streets in his 40s. That's the terrifying thing. Angie, so appreciate your call. Thank you very much. I think we've got, that's definitely an issue. We have got, you know, the leftist side of these things. Let's go to Peter. He's on the line in Suffolk. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Julia.
Hello, what do you want to say?
OK, ex-police officer, 31 years, retired in 2006. The rot started under Tony Blair, continued massively under Theresa May, who many think was the worst Home Secretary ever, tried to privatise as much as they could. And I get a little bit annoyed. I speak to a lot of my ex-colleagues and a lot of police officers. They feel demoralised. I certainly wouldn't want to do their job. They feel that they're doing the job that they've been told to do.
Not the job they thought they'd signed up to.
The job. It's nothing like the job they signed up to. It's the job they're told to do. Give you an example. Notting Hill Carnival. Don't do stop and search. Don't search for drugs. Don't search for knives. We'll deal with it afterwards.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll deal with it after people have been stabbed to death. Yeah, brilliant.
Exactly. When I was in the police, left-wing march, doesn't matter, we'll deal with it afterwards. National Front march, go in hard.
We've seen that on the streets in the last year or two.
Well, you think, Cleggate, Andrew Mitchell, Theresa May, the defunding of the police started there. They don't have canteens. I know a police officer in Suffolk who has to take a bag of clothes with him and change in a Sainsbury's when he gets soaked being at a road traffic accident. Sorry, I can't call it an accident anymore. Road traffic collision on the A14.
So you think I haven't got too long. You think that actually this is just down to we don't police properly anymore. We're not got priorities. We're not giving police the tools to actually in the direction to actually deal with this stuff.
No, if they get a complaint, he told me if he gets a certain number of complaints, they will automatically say that it is true. That fourth one will be true.
Because so many, exactly. That's very good. Well, you know what, Peter, just by coincidence, actually have a former Home Office Minister who was actually Deputy Prime Minister to Theresa May when she did become Prime Minister up next. So I'll put some of that to him. It's Damien Green coming up next. Peter, really appreciate your call. Thank you so much. 11:34 is the time. Damien Green up next. We'll bring you the latest when that sentencing of the Southport killer does actually begin. The court case has not actually begun yet. And talk about Keir Starmer taking on NIMBYs as well. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Philip Ingram's still with me. Just your reaction, just very briefly. We've just found out, obviously, the court case where the sentencing of Axel Rudikabana is going to take place very, very soon. They haven't actually started the hearing yet. We also have just learnt that the killer, Rudikabana, was rushed to hospital in the early hours of this morning. We're not told what reason why, but he needed medical treatment. His condition not deemed serious enough to delay the sentencing hearing today. But we know that he had been segregated from other prisoners while he awaited this hearing. But Philip Ingram, that's it's certainly a new piece of information.
Definitely a new piece of information, and there's a number of different explanations for it. We just don't know at this stage.
Self-harm, possibly.
It could have been self-harm. It could have been a panic attack. It could have been he's got a medical condition that we don't know about that came to the fore, and they just wanted to be sure he was fit for sentencing. Okay,
indeed. Well, we'll keep you up to date as and when that sentencing hearing does begin. Let's talk about all of that right now with Damien Green, former Cabinet Minister, Deputy Prime Minister under Theresa May when she was Prime Minister as well, and joins us now. Good morning to you, Damien.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. But it's a reasonable question. I know you're a lawyer as well. What do you think?
I'm not. No, I'm not.
You're a lawyer, but you're not a lawyer by trade.
I was a journalist. I was a journalist.
I do apologise. I know your partner's a lawyer, of course. Apologies for that. But what do you think the sentence should be for this man? We know he can't get a whole life tariff. Such a horrific crime. I'm not in favour of the death penalty, but the prospect that he could get a tariff where he has a life sentence and however many years minimum term, but he could realistically, under our system and under, frankly, the bleeding heart liberals who seem to run parole boards these days, he could realistically be out on the streets in, who knows, 20, 30 years. He's a young man right now, he's only 18. What do you think his sentence should be for these heinous crimes?
I mean, first of all, as long as possible. As you say, these are...
Come out of the box. There you go.
Some of the most... Well, like you, I'm not in favour of the death penalty for... the reasons, that looking back in history, people were killed by the state who were actually innocent. And I think in practical terms, in the modern world, it would be much more difficult to get people to convict someone if they thought he or she was going to be killed.
No, but dying behind bars because a life sentence actually means life.
Well, certainly... as long as possible, and certainly I would hope that if in some distant decade he comes before a parole board, the parole board takes into account the possible danger to society. I mean, clearly, he is a monstrous man who has committed the most appalling crime that many of us can think of. So. As I say, the only thing one could say without knowing all the details, obviously, is that it should be as long as possible.
We spoke to a journalist earlier, Charlie Bentley Astor, and she's been looking into a lot of the things that were on Rudikabana's computer, what has been revealed by the authorities so far. And although we've been told there wasn't a specific terrorist motivation, in the sense that he had an Al Qaeda training manual, but he wasn't necessarily motivated by Islamism and wasn't an Al Qaeda follower. And though he was obsessed with beheadings, with violence, with genocide, from what she's looked at, it does appear that he certainly had an obsession not just with genocide, but white genocide, ethnic cleansing. He had spoken at school about how Britain needed genocide like Rwanda, where his parents had come from, fleeing genocide there. He talked about the need for a white genocide. Do you think it is possible that actually, if this man was white and the children that he killed and attacked were black, and it was the other way round, this would have been very quickly spoken about by the authorities, by the Prime Minister and others as a far-right motivated terrorist incident. But because he was a black man and because he was talking about white genocide, they may not have learnt that for a few days till they looked at the documents he had on his computer, that things were treated very differently. Do you think that his skin colour has played a part?
I don't think so. I think there are legitimate questions about why wasn't it treated as a terrorist incident, a terrorist attack. And as you say, from everything I've read about it, it's slightly more complex and in a weird way even worse than that he was just obsessed with all kinds of mass murder of the worst people in history, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, people like that. And so it wasn't as simple as saying that this was an Islamist attack in the way we have seen other terrorist attacks in this country and elsewhere. So I can see it didn't fall under a narrow definition of terrorism. But it feels to me that the failure in the system has been that, very clearly all the evidence was that this boy, as he then was growing up into a monster, had obsessions with things that were the worst possible things to have obsessions with, and that therefore the system should have picked it up. So in a sense, the argument over, was it Islamism, was it racism, are second order. Whatever the motivation was,
he was a danger.
Signals were all there that he was one of the worst dangers that we've seen.
So what do you think did go wrong in that case in terms of the failures of Prevent, referred to 3 times, and we've got schools knew. It wasn't a mystery what was on his computer. A lot of this stuff had already been examined when he was referred to Prevent. It was known by the parents. He'd been violent at school. We think he may have tried to commit a massacre at his school only a week earlier, before the Southport attack. But we've also got, fatal stabbings of children on the streets of London and other major cities. Only last week, a 14-year-old stabbed on a bus, a 12-year-old stabbed to death on Tuesday in Birmingham, a 14-year-old arrested for that crime. For more than a couple of decades now, we've had this spate of killings, children in particular, killing other children with knives. And whether you can buy them on Amazon or whether you get them out of your parents' kitchen drawer, I think makes really very, very little difference. But how do we tackle that? How do we stop that becoming the norm and something that goes on the bottom of page 2 on page 14 in the newspaper, as opposed to being a national outcry?
Yeah, there's a lot of issues there, so let me disentangle them. First of all, I completely agree with you that Amazon and where you get them from is a bit of a side issue. Yes, let's make it more difficult for kids to buy knives online, but don't let's kid ourselves that that's going to solve the problem. We ought to do that anyway, but nevertheless, as you say, knives are widely available. And there are 2 separate other issues. The one specifically on the Southport killings is, and I think that clearly there should be more surveillance. I get the point that there are never going to be enough resources to, if you like, follow and check regularly on everyone who may come across the radar. But in this case, there seems to have been so much evidence built up. And as you say, he was planning, and his parents, I think, reported that he was planning something terrible at his old school. Then that feels like something that should have flagged up pretty intensive surveillance. But there is also a separate, equally terrible issue about knife crime generally, and there isn't a sort of simple solution to that, because a culture has grown up where, very sadly, large numbers of young people think that they're made more safe by carrying knives. And we all know that actually that's what makes them less safe, potential victims less safe, society less safe.
We also know a lot of those kids, they're more scared of the other kids with knives, the gang kids with knives, than they are of the police catching them and going to court.
Yeah, so some of it is about policing, and of course the police should concentrate on this. The court should not treat them too lightly. If sentencing needs to be increased, then sentencing needs to be increased. But there is a wider point. Once the police are involved, then inevitably a crime has been committed. Wow. So you want to get back from that and make it unacceptable. And that requires a huge education effort. And actually, it seems to be using some of the powers that are there now that weren't there 10, 15 years ago, like TikTok influencers and so on. Let's recruit them to make carrying a knife completely unacceptable. We all know, and we all repine about the fact that young people spend too much time in front of their screens, are influenced by people, well, let's use those influences for good.
I'd love to think that would work, and it might have the margins with some kids, but I fear, alas, it's gone too far. We had a caller just before you came on air called Peter. He's a former police officer, many years in the force, and he says police officers now are just utterly demoralised, feel they're not able to do the job they want to do. Certainly police officers that I know personally, people who approach me, the police officers say they're tearing their hair out about, the obsessions with, whether it's hurting words on Twitter, non-crime hate incidents, the stuff that they just don't think matters to the police, and their inability to do the stuff they think that would really matter, that would actually keep the streets safe.
Yeah, this has been going on.
You were
a
a
long
Home
time.
Office minister.
Yeah, and non-crime hate incidents, I think, are a waste of police time. I do think the police should be doing what they want to do, which is combating serious criminals, and regrettably, this is nothing new. I can remember from way back, quite early on in my time as an MP. Yeah. I was talking to police officers who said that they'd been sent to a primary school in my constituency. As it happens, a rural primary school in a lovely Kentish village, which is by no sense a hotspot of crime, because two boys have got involved in a fight. 8-year-old boys. One of them was Nepali. We have a big Gurkha community in Ashford, and so it was logged as a hate crime incident, and they had to go out. And 2 police officers spent an hour at a primary school over 2 boys.
Absolutely mad. Instead of taking knives from away from teenagers. Just finally, you were actually an immigration minister in the Home Office. Amazing stats available today. A guesstimate of how many people are illegally here in this country. Some 1 million, it's estimated by a study carried out, interestingly, for Thames Water. How much water do we need to provide for a huge number of people in this country? 1 in 12 people in London are believed to be people who are here illegally, overstaying, tourist visas, study visas, work visas and the like. My guess is it's way higher than that. We know in 2021 was the deadline for the EU settled status for EU citizens. The government had thought there were some 3.6 or 7 million EU citizens living in the country. Perfectly legally. Turned out there were 5.7 million. No idea even about the legal people here. I mean, how many people do you think are here illegally, and what are we going to do about it?
I don't know, and the Home Office doesn't know, and that may be
part of the problem.
We did, immigration numbers came down when I was immigration minister, and it was hard work, and we had to do things like, particularly with illegal immigration, closing bogus colleges, remember them, putting x-rays so that people couldn't come across in the back of lorries, remember that. You can solve this problem, but it then appears in other ways, like small boats. Yeah. So the only solution, there are 2 solutions. One is to deport more people, and I'm glad, as it were, across the political divide, that deportations have gone up a bit, but they need to go up a lot more. But more to the point, I think more importantly, is stopping them in the first place. You can things that we were criticised for, like making it more difficult for people to get credit cards and bank accounts if they were here illegally. That's the sort of thing, so that it's a less attractive place to come to illegally. Compared
to the other possible destinations. We'll have to leave it there. Damien Green, former Deputy Prime Minister, former Cabinet Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us. 11:49 is time. We're going to take a break. That hearing in Liverpool Crown Court for the sentencing of Axel Rudukabana has still not yet started, due to have started some 50 minutes ago. Up next, we are going to be talking about Keir Starmer vowing to override the whims of NIMBYs. But will he achieve that? This is Talk, Home of Common Sense.
changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. What a beautiful name. The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, Canada and the United States, that would really be something. All hell will break out in the Middle East, and it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:52 is the time, just to let you know that Axel Rudikabana is now in the dock at Liverpool Crown Court, and that the sentencing hearing has now begun. This after he had was taken to hospital in the early hours of the morning, needing hospital treatment. We haven't been given the details of that. I think a lot of people could probably make a guess about what may have happened. He's in a segregated cell, so but it will keep you updated on any developments on what is said in that court. There won't be any cameras in court for quite some time, no audio from the court. Right now, let's turn to our attention to one other subject I want to talk about in this hour, and that is Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, vowing to override the whims of NIMBYs. That's what he claims he's going to do. Anyway, he's promised to curb legal challenges against big building projects, whether that is the likes of new power stations, reservoirs, railways, and indeed, maybe runways, extra runways at London's airports. Let's talk about this with James Hummerston-Pope, who is a housing expert. A very, very good morning to you.
Good morning, how are you?
Very well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining us, James. Now, look, I mean, we've seen enough NIMBY action in terms of preventing housing being built. Everyone goes, we need to build more houses. Oh, just not here, not in my street, not in my village, not in my local area. Keir Starmer wants to go further and override some of the major legal actions which are taken against pretty much any project, usually on the basis of climate. Nearly always is about, the lesser spotted newt or vole or something. Tell us how that would work.
So essentially, when we break it down into numbers, they are going to reduce the number of times people can request to appeal something that wants to be built, be that a runway, be that a power station, be that homes, and they're going to reduce that down by 1 to 2 from the current 3 times that someone can appeal it. The other thing they're going to do is Keir Starmer's planning on enforcing timescales and targets within the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and effectively publishing those as effectively a list of league tables, so we can see which areas are failing and which councils are not keeping up with their end of the bargain. Right.
I mean, the key thing is we do need these major projects. We need to be able to have runways. We need power plants. We need reservoirs. No one wants them near them. The government already has the power to override a lot of the objections. Say this is critical infrastructure. We get the power to override this. But a lot of these projects, the government doesn't use those powers, but they end up in the courts for years and years and years and years. I mean, you want to build an airport. I mean, basically, settle in, grow your beard, raise a family,
maybe your grandchildren.
Raise your grandchildren, exactly. That's what happens. Other countries don't live like that. I mean, again, okay, we talk about, China builds this many airports in a week, but actually, other democratic countries, like France, like Germany, like the Dutch. I mean, you think, well, we're a very small country. You build anything anywhere, it's going to bother people in a different way. The Dutch managed to do it. Schiphol Airport's got 6 runways. Our biggest airport's got 2, for goodness sake.
I know. It's when you break it down into those sort of facts, it is crazy that we allow people to protest so much about things that halt not only the country's growth, but our economic growth and our quality of life as well. We have to get to grips with the fact that, we are a growing population, which means we need better infrastructure. And if we need better infrastructure, it's got to go somewhere. It can't go out into the sea.
I mean, I'm all in favour of people being compensated, for putting up with the noise and their homes are. I've got friends who've, had their homes compulsory purchased because of HS2 and the like. It's horrible. I mean, it's absolutely horrible. I think people need to be well compensated for things like that, but we do need this stuff to happen. Do you have any hope that this is going to happen? Because we know that, the last Tory government went on and on about all this planning, and then they backtracked when they had a load of Tory MPs in the shires whose constituents are going to be affected. Now a lot of those Tory MPs have been replaced by Labour MPs. Very narrow majorities, just there. So an awful lot of them may suddenly go, yeah, I love the idea of this in principle, but not here.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think what we will see is that a lot of the Labour backbenchers will start to worry about their seat. Let's be frank; they haven't had a wonderful time since they took over government, so they're going to worry about their seat and think, well, I need to push it away from my area, but it can be in someone else's backyard.
Yeah, it always is, isn't it? Again, it's not NIMBYs, it's bananas. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. So the one thing I actually agree with this government on, it really is. James Humberston Pope, thank you very much indeed. Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. I mean, you need the military to get this stuff done, don't you?
Oh, yeah, well, very much so. But, I think Keir Starmer's got bigger problems. It's not just getting rid of the whims of the NIMBYs, it's getting rid of the whims of the wokies. And most of them tend to be on his front bench.
Yeah, absolutely.
Until he does that, then he's on a hiding to nothing.
But the trouble is, you are going to have to push this stuff through. But it's amazing, actually, how much of this, it does happen. I've just been distracted because we just had some extraordinary information out from Liverpool Crown Court. Axel Rudiger did arrive in court just a few moments ago. He was seating in the dock. He had his head down, head in his lap. He's wearing a grey tracksuit with a face mask. He has just, we understand, he's just said, we understand the court has heard that when he was held in a custody suite after he was arrested for the murder of those 3 little girls and attempted murder of 8 children and others, that he said in the custody suite to the police, "I'm glad they're dead." That's what we've just been told by the court, Liverpool Crown Court, that Axel Rudiger said, "I'm glad they're dead." I think this sentencing hearing is going to be unbelievably hard, Philip, for so many people to listen to. But my God, the families of those children are in court hearing that.
Yeah, it's appalling. There's no sentence enough to punish him for what he has done, for the horrors he's perpetrated, and we need to make sure that this never happens again. And that's an easy statement to make, but we're
not going to do that.
We're not, and that's the unfortunate thing. There's so many lessons are going to come out of this.
My God. OK, we are going to be getting more details as we get them. There is no audio or video of the court for quite some hours, but we're going to bring you the latest as we get it. Axel Rudiger has said, well, when he was in the custody suite at the police station after killing those children and attempting to kill many others, that he was glad they are dead. We know he was taken to hospital in the early hours of the morning this morning. We're going to get details whatever we can. We'll bring them to you here first, here at Talk. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, whether you are listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. I really appreciate you joining us today. Extraordinary scenes we've just seen already in Liverpool Crown Court, where we are seeing the sentencing of Axel Rudikabana for the murders at in Southport on the 29th of July. We already knew that he had been taken to hospital in the early hours of this morning. He's in a segregated cell. It's believed he needed medical treatment. He was apparently delayed. The court hearing was due to start at 11, delayed by some 50 minutes or so, as the prosecution were laying out, the court was laying out the details of the case. We learnt, first of all, that Axel Rudikabana, when he was taken by police to a custody suite in the immediate aftermath of that horrific Southport attack, that he had said that he was glad that the children were dead. He'd said, "I'm so happy children were dead," and he told police, good thing those children are dead. I'm so happy." Absolutely horrific words, particularly for the families of those victims, the children who died and those who were stabbed and thankfully survived. He's now begun shouting in the dock. He's been shouting that he feels ill. He says, he shouted, "I need to see a paramedic because I feel ill." He told his lawyer he had chest pains, was too ill to continue. He has now been taken out of the courtroom. He's only been there in the court in seat itself since about 10:45 or so, ahead of that hearing, which was due to start at 11 o'clock. It's been delayed. We understand from those who were in the court that apparently he had refused to get out, leave his cell, refused to be taken into court. When he did go into court, he was sitting in a grey tracksuit with a face mask. I don't understand why defendants are allowed to cover their faces. Show your sodding face in court. Show it to the victims and their families that he had his head in his lap. He's complaining of being unwell, feeling ill. He has now been taken out of court. I can't imagine the court officials have any choice but to do that. Before we go to our next guest on this, Philip Ingram, look, he was in hospital in the early hours. Obviously, suspicion will be, given that he was segregated from other prisoners, that it may possibly involve self-harm. It may possibly have been, more serious than that. But also the concern, I imagine, would be that the sentencing hearing would go ahead. Everyone is gathered. It's very traumatic for the families, but also the need to have him in court so that families get their moment and get to read their victim impact statements to him, because they weren't there on Monday when everyone thought there was going to be jury selection for the first day of this trial that was due to last some 4 weeks. Very difficult for the families, and then suddenly out of the blue, no expectation even from his defence lawyers that he was going to plead guilty. What do you make of what's happened so far?
Well, I think it's dramatic. He could be wearing that face mask because he could have been spitting at those court officials that were bringing him into court and everything else. It's important he sits down there, but he shouldn't be allowed to abuse other people. It's important for the families to be able to look him in the eyes and read their impact statements. And I think it's critical that no matter what he gets sentenced today, that there are no delays to this, because clearly he is an unstable individual and there are other issues.
Well, Stan writes at KC, who told the court that those at prison, they were concerned about his well-being. I'm not concerned about his well-being.
No.
He hadn't eaten or drunk for some time.
Oh dear.
Mr. Justice Goose, who is the judge presiding over this case, he had said that Rudikabana had been seen by doctors. He'd been to hospital. He was content that he was fit to attend the hearing. He said, "I want this hearing to continue." Whether this hearing will continue or not, either in his absence or just be delayed even further, as it already has been, and he will be brought back to court after getting medical attention. We will see. We know we've had cases in the not distant past where we've had a defendant just refusing to attend court, just refusing, and law, always wanted to change the law. I don't think that even went into the legal system to actually change the law. So no, you're guilty. You appear in court. You don't get the option of sitting. And your victims have a right to see you.
Oh, they do, definitely. And any delay is just further traumatising those poor families who've been so horrifically traumatised with the whole event so far. So we should focus on the families and forget about him, because he's admitted to his crime. And sorry, if he's suffering, he's suffering.
I care not a jot.
Let's not make the families suffer any more than necessary.
The families having to hear that he, when he was arrested by the police, when he was in the police custody suite at the police station, I'm so happy children are dead. Good thing those children are dead. I'm so glad. I'm so happy. Imagine. I mean, it cuts you to the core hearing that. And I don't know anyone involved in the case. Imagine being a parent. Imagine being a parent sitting there in that court hearing that.
Yeah, and Charlie Bentley Astor, who was
journalist
we spoke to earlier, has just put out on a tweet that when he was in the cell, he asked what the age was of the youngest child, and when he was told it was 6, he laughed.
I'm opposed to the death penalty, but I'm struggling with that today.
I'm not struggling whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk to Helen Fields right now. She's a former criminal barrister and author and joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Helen.
Hello, Julia.
I mean, it's just harrowing what is coming out of the court. What little bit we have heard before this, the killer was taken out of court. First of all, can we just talk about the evidence that we're hearing now, which we would have heard in the court case had he not pleaded guilty? And we know that there was no planned defence. He refused to cooperate with his defence barristers, and he was a complete surprise to them when he did suddenly. He'd been silent in 5 previous court hearings, where people come to court many times, and then he entered this guilty plea to all 16 charges. Now he's being sentenced, but it's just been taken out of court. What do you make of what we'd already heard, just that he told police that he was happy that the children had died?
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to hear, even given some of the terrible cases that our court system has dealt with in the past. It's a marker, really, of just how deeply deranged this young man must be. And I know that the defence lawyers have said that they won't be producing a psychiatric report, but there are issues about mental health. But what we now know, of course, is that this young man's problems and fascination with violence, terrible fascination, go back a really long way, to the extent that it's then the context of that he's been interested in all sorts of different organisations who have historically been guilty of violence. I'm not desperately surprised, but it's devastating. It takes an awful lot for families to go to court, to sit in a courtroom. It's a long journey from when the offences happen to get there. It's the very last thing they need to hear. And of course, though, the judge will be taking it into account, because people who are genuinely remorseful and who seem to be sorry from what they did from an early stage will get a more sympathetic hearing to an extent, although that extent is very small in a murder case. But the judge will take this into account. And when he's looking at, because of course the judge is today deciding what the minimum sentence will be before Rudy Cabana is eligible for parole, that's going to be a very high number.
Well, indeed. I mean, we knew early, as soon as the guilty plea went in, that he could not get a whole life tariff because he was 17. Is it 21 or 18? At which point that whole life tariff cannot be applied. In which case, even if he gets, a life sentence and then a minimum time, I mean, realistically, he could be out on the streets, in his 40s, could he not?
Well, he could, but I strongly suspect here that our worst concerns about that may not come to light. You're looking at the judge setting a minimum term before which he can even go before the parole board. But what will happen then is the parole board have to look at all the circumstances and be certain that he does not pose the same risk going out. I have to say, having looked at all the circumstances of this case and the young man's background and the extent to which agencies have been involved, it is possible that the Rudy Cabana will not be walking on our streets again for decades and decades, and thank goodness.
I mean, thank goodness. I would say never, but there we are. We understand that the sentencing hearing is going to continue without Axel Rudy Cabana. We understand he did not want to attend. He was brought in. We don't know. He was wearing a face mask, a surgical mask. We don't know whether that was required. Because, I mean, as has been suggested by Philip Ingram, he might have been spitting at staff, or whether he, it was something he chose to do. We know he certainly used his in all previous hearings. Until we saw the guilty plea, we didn't see the mugshot, what he actually looks like. Right now we'd only had this lovely little angelic choir boy, aged 12, and he's always tried to cover his face. He's shouting in the dock that he was unwell. We know he'd been in hospital in the early hours. Seems to be some suggestion that it may have been an attempt at self-harm, possibly even a suicide attempt, but that we don't know that. That's people are suggesting this, but that he's now left the court. But there has been this issue in terms of people, killers, not hearing the sentencing, not being there also to hear the victim impact statements being read out by the family members. Lucy Letby, of course, famously just simply refused. We didn't find out for a long time because, of course, there were so many cases of the babies that she was accused of murdering and attempting to murder. It took weeks and weeks for that case to be allowed to be reported on publicly. But that she, after a period of time, I'm just not appearing in court. And then lots of calls for the law to be changed. But I believe the law has not actually being changed in time to insist, no, you will sit there in court whether you like it or not, and you will hear that sentencing and hear those victim impact statements. What do you make of that?
No, the law hasn't changed yet. I suspect there will be changes coming. Yeah. I certainly hope so. The Lucy Letby thing was terrible. The families are entitled to say their piece in front of the perpetrator of this level of violence. The problem is that more often than not, that when we bring people to court who don't want to be there, who don't agree to be there, is that they become disruptive and unpleasant. Even, I say that in the context of this, even more unpleasant when they're in the dock. Yeah. And they take the opportunity not to look repentant and not to listen. And in some ways it can be worse. So if you have someone who doesn't want to be there, then it can be very, very destructive. But I would say that we need to start looking at penalties for this and whether or not that's, the virtue of the prison governor saying, right then, if you don't turn up, then it's you get no visits. Yeah. You get none of the sort of, the very, very small amount of perks that our prison service allows. There has to be an ongoing system for making people take responsibility for those sorts of choices. I think it's probably right that the judge in this case just carries on in sentences. It's been too long in coming. It's too distressing. I think the idea for the parents of those girls of coming back yet again would be equally awful. So there are no winners here. There's no good option. But what does need to happen is that Rudy Kobana needs to get as long a sentence as he can possibly get, and as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Well, while this continues, and we just to let you know, Rudy Kobana had shouted to the court, "I can't remain quiet." Was told to stay quiet. And he said, "I can't remain quiet. I've not eaten for 10 days. I feel ill. I'm not going to remain quiet." And he shouted, "Don't continue," as the judge ordered him to be taken out. But one family member in the court did shout "coward" at Rudy Kobana as he left the dock. Other relatives, shook their heads. Just incredibly distressing. We've had some more detail about what happened in the actual moment of this awful rampage of murder. And we understand that the prosecution's lawyer has said that Rudy Kobana originally walked to a car body repair shop near Heartspace, where that Taylor Swift dance class was going on. But he entered the Taylor Swift dance class around 11:45, and he said, the lawyer said, within seconds of going into the building, screams could be heard coming from within. She also talked about how the yoga instructor, Leanne Lucas, the female adult who was one of the attempted murder charges, she felt a knife go into her back, and everyone ran towards the door of the dance class. And she recalled the evidence she would have given in court is that Rudy Kobana chased them as the children ran down the stairs. She told them, "Run away, run away." And they had CCTV footage which shows the child trying to leave the building before being pulled back into the building by Rudy Kobana and stabbed. I mean, Helen Field, this is really harrowing stuff.
It is. It's incredibly harrowing. And, no one prepares parents, but no one prepares, friends, the community, police officers, paramedics for this sort of thing. Everyone's worst nightmare. You never think it's going to happen in your community. We do need to do more. I mean, there are big questions here. We know there's going to be a public inquiry, quite rightly, because the problem and the breakdown seems to me not to have been that this young man was referred to enough different agencies, but there's not enough cross-checking between agencies. So what happens is that every time there's an individual record, it's not touching up to something bigger, something more substantial.
But again, it's almost like that sort of, domestic violence when it's treated as individual. Oh, there's been this one instance, not going, well, hold on, it's clearly a pattern of behaviour that says this person is desperately dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we need to get right. And I'm very hopeful that the public inquiry will look at the ways in which that should have happened.
Yeah.
It's of no consequence to the families. It's of no consequence to the loved ones today.
No.
The things that should have happened.
No, indeed.
Every time there's a case like this, we have to learn the lessons. There's going to be a time for that. It's not today. Yeah. But the whole of the system needs to learn the lessons from these sort of things when we ignore clear signs of mental health.
I worry that we never do. I mean, can I ask you just, we spoke to a journalist earlier, Charlie Bentley Astor. She's been looking into a lot of the documents in public domain now, but what things that were on his computer. It does suggest that we know this Axel Rujabana was obsessed with genocide, with beheadings, with extreme violence. He had this Al-Qaeda manual. We know all of that. But she thinks that he may have been obsessed with white genocide. He talked about Britain needing genocide like Rwanda to his school friends. He talked about the need for a white genocide at a football match. He appeared to be obsessed with ethnic cleansing. I'm wondering, whether this clearly seems to me to be coming under some sort of terrorism, a headline. And if this were the other way around and it was a white killer talking about black genocide or Muslim genocide, that this would clearly have been labelled as such. We would have known that straight away. It would have been called a far-right, racist killer. But the rules seem to be different when it's the other way around. Does any of that matter?
I don't think it's that the rules are different. I think that there's something happened here that we haven't seen before. And law only ever plays catch up. That's the problem with the system that we've got. It's inevitable. Yeah. And so the difficulty is that I think that after this, we need to have a good look at the intent and what really happened. I mean, I think one of the really horrendous things about this offence is that he chose little girls. He chose them in a dance studio where he was probably betting that there were only females. I think one of the families called him a coward. I think that's entirely correct. I think he went somewhere that he knew there was unlikely to be men, unlikely to be people that could stand up to him physically and challenge him. So I think, there are all sorts of aspects to this about his obsession that we need to look at really hard. And I know there's been talk about expanding the scope of terrorism. I think that has to be done in a careful, measured, sensible way. Yeah. And I think also that we need to just rethink as human beings what terrorism is. They've looked at this harder, I think, in the States, where they look at domestic terrorism and what that really means. And I think there is some scope here, not just for blindly expanding what MI5 and the police need to do.
But looking into those motivations. Helen Fields, so appreciate you joining us. Really appreciate your analysis there. Former criminal barrister and author. Thank you for that. We come back to Philip Ingram. Just to let you know, I mean, the killer has been seen by medical staff. He was taken out of court. He's being removed. Let's be honest, couldn't care less about what state he's in. He's not eaten, he's whatever. But I don't care. I don't care. What we've heard in terms of him saying that he was glad that little girls were killed, that he asked the police, how young was the youngest child? And then smiling. I mean, there is no sense of remorse coming out here.
None whatsoever, and therefore no sentence is long enough. And I take my hat off to the court officials and to the police that are having to handle him for doing it in a professional way and not wanting to do anything to the individual, because no adult human being. It would be very difficult to hold yourself back with that. With an individual.
I mean, that is the thing, isn't it? There are some crimes, and again, and this is where. this is where that emotional reaction that we did have as a nation last July when this happened. Yes, there were people who just criminals. There were far-right people who wanted to stir up racial tension. There was a lot going on. But this sort of labelling, everyone's all far-right and awful for being angry about this. Now we're told by Keir Starmer, by the way, this week, that it's OK to be angry about it. We're right to be angry about it. I don't know how people can't be angry about this. I do genuinely think that there really has been a cover-up about the motivation for this crime. And again, we saw Twitter policing of the unrest on the streets. It wasn't just the far-right. We've seen two-tier justice in terms of the sentencing and even bringing charges at all. And I think we're seeing two-tier treatment of people when it comes to things like Prevent. And it's sort of, oh, well, but he's only obsessed with white genocide. I do not believe that a white kid who had the same sort of stuff and was talking about there needs to be a black genocide or a Muslim genocide or anything like that in this country. I don't believe for a moment he'd have been treated the same way.
No,
I just don't.
He wouldn't have been. And Charlie Bentley Astor's analysis of the white genocide side of things, that falls into the current definition by the CPS of terrorism. So we don't need to change the definition. This is where, and Keir Starmer will know that. He's supposed to be a barrister. He's supposed to be able to understand these things.
I mean, some of the details that have emerged, just the sentencing hearing is continuing. Killer is being seen by medical staff. That screams were heard within 30 seconds, the killer entering the dance class. The yoga instructor, the woman who got stabbed, he's been admitted attempted murder of her. This is Leanne Lucas, that she felt the knife go into her back. Everyone else ran to the door of the dance class. She shouted at the children, just run away, run away. He chased them out. One little girl was seen on CCTV. Bearing in mind, these are primary school age children. One little girl seen on CCTV footage trying to leave the building, getting out of the building and being pulled back in by Rudy Cabana.
There's no words. There's no. There are
you
no
know me,
words.
I can yap for Britain, but.
Exactly, and I can't say on air what I'd want to do.
There are so many words. Should we take a break and we'll all just say off air what we want to say?
Can we pre-record it and then just put it out?
Yeah, probably could take it off air because God forbid you can't swear, because that would be the really bad thing. It would be equivalent to a hurty tweet while our children are being slaughtered. But what's a bit of slaughter between friends, eh? I mean, come on. Your calls coming in thick and fast, understandably. 0344 499 1000. Give us a call. We'll get some calls on air up next. We're going to be talking about, we're going to intersperse coverage of this with some other topics that are important, that I still want to get to, but obviously we'll keep you up to date with any developments we get from that court in Liverpool. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high. and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence. She has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:27 is the time. Philip Ingram's still with me. We're going to get to your calls in just a couple of moments. Just going to read you the latest that's come out from the sentencing hearing of Axel Rudikabana. He has been taken out of court. He's complained of being unwell. He's been seen by medics. He had been taken to hospital in the early hours of the morning. We understand he's not eaten and drunk pretty much anything. Must have been drinking some water for the last 10 days, but not eaten much. Couldn't care less about his state of health personally, but that's just me, old-fashioned. But horrific details being read out in court of what actually happened on the day of the Southport attacks. This is very distressing stuff. The prosecutor, Diana Casey, has been describing the case, describing how the yoga instructor first knew when Axel Rudikabana entered the dance studio, that felt the knife in her back. Children, she shouted to children to run away. They ran to the door. CCTV footage showing one child trying to get out of the door, being pulled back in by the killer. We now also are hearing about the businessman John Hayes, also someone who's into the attempted murder charge, pleaded guilty to on Monday. He has an office in the building. He heard screams. He approached the killer. He swiped a knife as he tried to grab hold of the weapon. Hayes was, as we know, stabbed in the leg, fell to the ground. He shouted for help. Window cleaners driving past saw Leanne Lucas, the yoga instructor, the class instructor, covered in blood, and she was shouting, "Someone's stabbing the kids." One of the window cleaners, incredibly brave, went into the building, saw Rudikabana at the top of the stairs holding a bloodied knife, and retreated. They managed to get back into the building. At the top of the stairs, they found the attacker standing over the body of BB King. She's the 6-year-old who was killed, holding a bloodied kitchen knife. One of the window cleaners picked up baby King, carried her out of the building, screaming about that she's been injured, obviously hoping to get her to some sort of treatment. Police arrived at the scene to find people in a state of panic. Absolutely horrific details coming out there. Let's go to your calls. Harry's in East Yorkshire. Harry, hearing these latest details, I mean, I don't know if you're a parent or not, but as a parent, it's just absolutely harrowing.
Yes, Julia, it's really upsetting to hear. And that's how I've kind of been following a lot of this, is from the point of view of a parent.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are 3 children who have been taken away. And, you know, I think of myself, I try and put myself in the parent's shoes. And I think if somebody took my baby away from me, and then has the gall to stand there and say, I'm not feeling very well, I've not eaten, I've not drunk. Yeah. And we're all supposed to, you know, we have to be quiet, we can't say the wrong thing, we must do proper. And, you know, and I guess one thing I would say is that I feel that a lot of that anger that people have is what filtered through with the people who went out and demonstrated, which obviously then devolved into rioting. But that anger comes from the same place. It's the same anger I feel now.
It's in your soul, isn't it? I mean, again, I'm a bitter old hack. You know, I've been covering horrible cases for years and covering the cases, you know, in person in court. There's sometimes just moments that just hit you like a punch in the stomach, and you think that parents hearing that. I mean, do you think there's a single parent tonight isn't going to hold their kids that little bit closer?
Oh, well, I've been keeping a close eye on my daughter ever since then. But, you know, I just feel like, why should I have to? Like, why have we got to this point where it's like, you know, we have to be so hyper-vigilant? You know, I think back to the 90s growing up, and, you just wouldn't hear of stuff like that.
Again, it's normal. We're supposed to, we light candles, we sing Kumbaya, don't look back in anger, and then we just move on, and all lessons will be learned. This isn't the norm. This isn't normal. It didn't used to happen. Why is it happening? We need to address the real issue. Harry, thank you very much for that call. Let's go to Lucy, who's in Shropshire.
Hello, Julia.
Hi.
Just listening to the account you've just read out and sort of going into mourning all over again, really. But the point I wanted to make was slightly in relation to civil liberties and how it is going to be the parents, loving, decent parents who are trying to do their best for their children, home educating them to keep them safe and give them the sort of education they want. They are going to be punished as a direct result of the state's failure to deal with the criminally insane, like this wicked young man.
Well, he's mad or bad or both. Well, definitely bad.
Both. Clearly both, but I mean, he's not the first. We know all about this, and as your previous caller was saying, you know, I'm in my mid-50s, and this just didn't used to be a thing.
Really, I mean, it just really didn't.
It did not, but the problem is that Keir Starmer, I just heard his speech, you know, when he was trying to cover his back about this, I think on Monday, and he kept underlining the point that everything was going to change now to keep children safe. What that means is that if you can't stand your local school and you want to educate your children at home, the council now will have the power to come into your home, interfere, and if they don't like the cut of your jib, they have the power to make your child go to a school of their choice.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that doesn't tackle any of the issues that we really need to tackle, does it? Lucy, I really appreciate your call. Thank you so much. Sorry for cutting you off. Just want to get some more details that have emerged from court. There is no audio, there is no video from court at this time until we get the actual sentencing by the judge, Mr Justice Goose. But we've got more details being laid out by the prosecutor in court. And as you can probably understand, we know that the families of the victims, those who died, those who were severely injured, there have been family members in tears. I'm pretty sure a lot of you will be in tears hearing this. So the prosecutor described how one mother came to collect her daughter and saw people running away from the dance studio. She heard screaming from inside the dance event. She managed to grab her daughter who'd run out the door and get her into the car. 3 other children, she got into the car as well, one of whom had a bleeding injury to her chest. And Alice da Silva Aguiar, who we know was one of the children who died, just 9 years old. She collapsed. She ran out the building. She collapsed by the side of the vehicle, badly injured. We know she later died. Philip Ingram, I mean, you're hard as nails, and I can see the details of this. I mean, I've a good friend of mine who is a journalist who's in court, and she was messaging this morning saying, you know, I'm already struggling. We haven't even heard the details of this case yet.
You can't not struggle when you hear
because every one of us will have. Now, our child has gone off to like a whether it's school or a summer camp, or you know, you just assume they're coming home alive.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't put yourself in the position of the parents and the parents of the kids that have survived.
I can't imagine the parents having to. The parents having to read this as well, to hear this. Well, you know. More details.
You have to get closure today.
Yeah.
It has to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a very quick break. There's some other stories we do want to get to. We're going to do our best to get to those. We're going to collect ourselves because, my God, this isn't about us. This is about the parents. This is about the parents right now and those children who are still living with their injuries, some maimed for life. We need to think about them listening to this in court. Going to come back in a moment. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right, we've composed ourselves again. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Really appreciate you joining us. We are obviously keeping a total lookout for what's going on at the sentencing at Liverpool Crown Court of the killer, Axel Rudikabana. He has left court. He was taken to hospital in the middle of the night. He was able to get into court. He's insisted he was too ill to stay in court. Family members of those who lost loved ones shouting coward at him, understandably. Having to hear just the most horrific details. Judge insisting, Mr Justice Goose, that the sentencing hearing does go ahead in Rudikabana's absence, but we've been hearing details from the prosecutor about how the yoga instructor, the woman running the dance class, had been stabbed in the back, telling the children, the kids to run away from that dance class, the Taylor Swift-themed dance class on the 29th of July. Kids screaming, covered in blood, running to the door. One child, just horrific CCTV footage, apparently showing one child being pulled back in to the dance studio by the killer. We know one mother arriving managed to get her daughter, who ran out the building, and 3 other children into the car. But we also know that Alice Da Silva Aguera, just 9 years old, that she had a stab wound and that she collapsed just out beside the car. We also know that window cleaners, incredibly brave businessman John Hayes, entered the building, got stabbed himself. Window cleaners driving past saw that there was someone covered in blood, heard the screaming about children being stabbed, ran into the building. Incredible bravery from ordinary people, pulling back when they saw Rudikabana with the knife at the top of the stairs, then getting upstairs, finding the little 6-year-old BB King, finding her with severe stab wounds at the top of the stairs, carrying her down the stairs, carrying her outside, and the emergency services arriving very soon after. Of course, we know that BB King, Alice Da Silva Aguera, and also Elsie Stankum all lost their lives, 8 others stabbed. Just been told that some members of the families have chosen to leave the court as details of the pathological evidence has begun to be read out. Bearing in mind there's no audio, there's no video right now of what is being said in court. We're hearing from the prosecutor, we've heard from the judge as well. We're going to be hearing victims' impact statements as well from the family members as well, but none of this is being played out over TV or radio. We're getting these reports from those in court, from journalists in court, but I can understand certainly that members of the family just don't want to be hearing any more horrific details than they need to already. We're going to come back to that in just a couple of moments. I want to talk about something else very briefly. Any new details, we will interrupt, we will talk about that. I promise you we'll bring you the details first. But there is something that's happening in Parliament tomorrow that I think people need to know about. I'm not on air tomorrow. I want to talk about this because MPs are considering a bill which, as one writer, Chris Morrison, has said, will likely cause mass starvation, death, disease and societal collapse in just the next few years. Sounds a bit crazy, bit conspiracy theory, but it isn't. Let's talk to Chris Morrison, who's environment editor at the Daily Sceptic, who joins us right now. Good afternoon to you, Chris.
Hi, Julia. It's a sad day. I know that I've been trying to compose myself here in the Zoom green room. It's just unbelievable. Isn't it?
It is, absolutely. It really is. And you'll understand, I think we'll keep much briefer than I perhaps would have on another day, because we do want to keep abreast of what is going on in court. I say there will be, if I interrupt you, please don't be offended. I'm sure you will understand. Just explain to me what's going on in Parliament tomorrow, because it's a private member's bill, and it's about, climate and nature, and it sounds all lovely and nice and cuddly, but tell us what's going on.
Well, it's far from lovely and cuddly. It's essentially a private member's bill. Ross Savage, a Liberal Democrat MP, is supported by all of the Liberal Party, 80 members of the Labour Party, about 200 MPs. It's a private member's bill. And essentially, it will remove 90% of our use of hydrocarbons within 6 to 10 years.
That's fossil fuels.
Yes, they call them fossil fuels. I call them hydrocarbons. I mean, it's basically,
most of our energy supply, basically. And the argument, this is about protecting climate change, protecting nature, and all of that. But I mean, this goes way beyond the net zero targets that we had imposed on us in Parliament, back under Theresa May, the 2050 target, or even some of the mad targets we've got for 2030 and 2035 involving EVs and electricity production. This is about talking about doing stuff within, a few years.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the idea of 2050, there's a government-funded body called UK Fires that looks at if we go to net zero under current technology, we'll have about a third of the energy, and that will lead to no flying, no shipping, no meat in the diet, no building materials. And these people are trying to do it within a decade. I've actually, and so when I wrote that article, it's not often a journalist gets to write about MPs voting on a bill that will cause mass death, starvation, etc., etc. But as I said in the article, I said, is it an exaggeration? Is it a conspiracy theory? Or let's look at the facts. And if you remove hydrocarbon use, 90%. People, so I described in the article how it's a combination of zealots and boobies. The zealots know exactly what they're doing. It's essentially a political campaign. It's a fully disguised with climate. It's essentially to take control of what we eat and consume and how we travel. The boobies, of course, it's all lovely and fluffy, and they think they're saving the planet and the beavers.
virtue signal. But this is the thing: private members' bills don't normally come into law. But we've seen recently, with the assisted dying bill, very likely to come into law. But also we know with a lot of these bills, on Friday in Parliament, most MPs aren't sitting. Everyone's concentrating on other things. A bunch of zealots turn up. They can vote something through. This is the second reading tomorrow. And again, it all sounds nice and fluffy, and everyone can pat themselves on the back about being lovely and green and tweet about it. But the reality is, if you get rid of this amount of fossil fuels being used, you mean that you say, we can't heat our homes, we can't have electric lights, we can't have fridges, we can't make basic medical supplies, we can't drive cars, we can't use trains, we can't fly anywhere, we can't transport anything into this country, we won't be able to import anything, we won't be able to make anything. Manufacturing, it's gone overnight. We can't build anything. We will be starving. Fertilizers, huge amount of our food production, both here and across the third world, by the way, relies on fossil fueled produced fertilizers.
Yes, without fossil fuel fertilizers, world food supply will collapse by a half.
People would starve. It's as simple as that. People would starve. But this thing, do people realise a lot of this? I mean, a lot of the stuff we talk about, we have hysteria from climate change activists all the time, and we just, laugh at them a lot of the time, but an awful lot of people believe it. And if people just watch the BBC or Sky News and read The Guardian, or frankly, the Times newspaper as well, it can be just as bad, they would actually think, yes, this would be, there are people who won't have children because they think the world is ending. All complete, abject nonsense lies. It's lies. But the net zero laws that impact us directly now, they were voted for by supposedly sensible people. There's every chance this could happen.
Well, boobies, I think, is. I just don't think they have an idea of. The education system hasn't taught them the use of hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are the basis of a modern industrial society. Without them, we go back to primitive times. Hence my article, which obviously the headline was designed to attract attention.
But it's true.
It's true. Yes.
It's all true. I mean, this actually will. But again, exactly. We can't treat diseases. We can't. Most of the items that are used in hospital are plastics. They need fossil fuels. We worry about some pensioners not being able to heat their homes in the depths of winter. No one will be able to heat their homes. You can't refrigerate food. You can't. People will starve to death. It sounds an utterly, crazed Hollywood movie, but these people are genuinely, these are organisations, lots of this stuff, the likes of Sadiq Khan, Andy Burnham, major mayors of major cities, are signed up to this agenda.
Joan Bakewell, Chris Packham, Hugh Fearnley-Whittenstall, the list goes on. Yep. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, the rather otherworldly Rowan Williams, half the House of Bishops is signed up to this, and it is a path to just complete disaster. And I simply, they are, I emphasise again, they are removing 90% of our hydrocarbon use within 6 to 10 years, and you have 200 people. 200, nearly a third of the House of Commons are saying they're in favour of this. Yeah. And I've just written another article with Lady Skeptic, because we're doing one that will come out tomorrow, and it says that something along the lines of 40 years ago, David Steele, the Liberal leader, told his people to go back to their constituencies and prepare for government. The current chap, Ed Davey, is telling his people to go back to their constituencies and prepare to live in mud huts and grass.
And we're talking Stone Age. We really, that's why it's such an important topic, and I wanted to talk about it. Chris Morrison, so appreciate you joining us, environment editor at the Daily Skeptic. Philip Ingham, just a very brief word on that. You can understand why I wanted to mention that, because it's such an important thing.
Very much so. And a large proportion of the revenue that goes to the Exchequer comes from the taxes of hydrocarbons that are used. So there's going to be no money for the Chancellor to do anything else.
No, there won't be a chance, because there'll be no. Literally societal collapse. I wanted to do that story. You'll understand why. Let's go back now to what's going on at Liverpool Crown Court, because we're hearing more details of the case of Axel Rudikapana. He is not in the courtroom. He's claimed to be unwell. The case is continuing. I think some of the family members shouted coward at him as he left the court. More evidence we've been hearing from the prosecution lawyer. She says that the body-worn footage from the first police officer arriving on the scene showed them running into the building and up blood-covered stairs. There was lots of loud shouting and screaming. They found Rudikapana crouched over the body of B.B. King, who had visible and severe stab injuries. He was holding a large bloodied kitchen knife. He dropped when told to do so. In the studio itself, the dance studio where the Taylor Swift dance event was happening, police found the body of Elsie Stankum lying on her back on the floor. It was obvious at that time already that she was dead. We know that Alice da Silva Aguera, the 9-year-old who died, that she had made it outside but collapsed beside a car where her mother had grabbed her daughter and 3 other children to get them into the car. More absolutely harrowing evidence coming out from that court. We're going to take another quick break. We'll bring you more of the details as soon as we get them here at Talk. Stay tuned.
We face an existential threat in this country, a wave of migration that we have seen. And I read a report overnight suggested that there are something like 500,000 illegal migrants in our capital city. The British people are entitled to demand of their politicians an end to this, what my mother described in a letter to the Daily Telegraph in 1967 as alien invasion. It has got to stop.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the other home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram is still with me. I'm going to have to give you a warning now about the distressing content that's coming up. I mean, as if the last hour of content hasn't been distressing enough about the details of the Axel Rudikapana killings in Southport last July. I'm going to read it out because I think people need to know if you've got children in the car with you or anything like that. I do suggest that just take the radio down for a few minutes. But I think it's important that we do know because the prosecutor in the case has been giving details. By the way, Rudy Cabana is still out of the court because, as one of his family members shouted, he is a coward not hearing this, although we understood earlier that he had, in the police station after being arrested and detained, asked how young the youngest child was, finding out it was 6, was who died, was smiled and said he was glad and happy, used the word glad and happy that children were dead. I've had some description of the footage from the cameras of the body cameras of the police officers as they entered the building after a businessman had entered trying to save children. He got stabbed. Window cleaners had found a baby king lying at the top of the stairs. Police entered very soon afterwards and found Rudy Cabana crouching over the little BB King, the youngest of the victims, and they found her at just stage 6 crouched over with extensive injuries. We now know, and some of the parents chose to leave the courtroom at this time, we now know that the extent of the injuries really is quite extraordinary, that Elsie Dot Stankin, who was 7 years old, had 85 sharp force injuries. She was stabbed 85 times. And that BB King, the post-mortem examination found she had suffered at least 122 stabbings. Both children had wounds on their arms, suggesting they had attempted to defend themselves. What is also extraordinary that we've learned is that when Rudy Cabana first entered the dance studio, because who would not think that a man who was arriving at the studio was not picking up the children, that the woman who was also victim, the woman running the course, that she assumed he was a father picking up the children. He was silent. And as he entered the studio, he grabbed the child nearest to him and put his arm around her. He stabbed 3 children before she even realised that what he had done. Before she realised, her first realisation of what was going on was when he stabbed her in the back. He moved quickly through the room, we're told by the court, without saying anything. It was only when he reached Leanne Lucas, she felt a knife go in her back, she realised he was armed and stabbing the children. The children ran towards the door out of the corridor, and we now know also there was CCTV footage showing that one of the children who had run out to the door ran out and was getting out and was pulled back in by Axel Rudy Cabana. We now know the police arrived to this blood-soaked scene, but she did not realise that the children had been stabbed. Philip Ingram, I mean, this is absolutely harrowing stuff, and there's going to be more detail coming. Understandable, the parents didn't want to hear some of this. The number of wounds, this was a frenzied attack. So many wounds inflicted on these little children.
Inhuman. Yeah, that's the only way you can describe this individual. There aren't enough. The court doesn't have enough powers to do to the individual what I think should be done to him. It'll not bring the children back. It'll not give the parents any closure. Hearing all of this won't give them any closure. It'll give them further nightmares. I can understand why some parents have left the courtroom. Yeah. The parents need to get their victim statements out, and the judge needs to sentence them, and there needs to be something that draws a line under this as much as possible. But unfortunately it's not going to. It's going to continue the debate, and that's going to further traumatise the parents for days and weeks to come.
What is incredible is that they said it was obvious that Elsie was dead. The window cleaners carried BB King out of the studio. Alice de Silva Aguero, we heard earlier, a mother had arrived. She saw the kids running out. She grabbed her own child, got her in the car, 3 other children, and little Alice, aged 9, collapsed at the side of the car. She managed to get out of the building alive, but her blood was found in the studio near the tables. They were actually making bracelets at the time. So when Axel Rudy Cabana walked in and he was stabbing the children, they were sitting at the table making bracelets, for God's sake. It suggests that she was initially stabbed around the table. She was later taken to Aldehay Hospital. She was pronounced dead at 1 o'clock the next morning. And the post-mortem examination found a severe head injury likely to be caused by bleeding in the brain. There was also a little girl seen on CCTV as he pulled back into the building by Axel, having almost escaped. She was stabbed 32 times. She was taken to the hospital as well in a life-threatening condition. She underwent surgery. The worst wound was penetrated her diaphragm and her kidney, but amazingly has survived. When we talk about 3 children murdered, we need to remember there were 8 other children who were stabbed and severely injured. Many spent a long time in hospital. It's extraordinary the bravery that a child has just been stabbed repeatedly, a child able to somehow get out of that studio and get to the street. These details are so unbelievably harrowing of what these children went through. There is going to be no closure with any sentencing today, not for these families.
No, there'll never be closure, and for the community. You know, and everyone that's involved in it. And this is where our politicians need to stop making political statements and trying to cover their backsides. Just
for the love of God.
Be plain, talk in plain language, and
stop thinking like a lawyer and think like a father. I mean, that's what I think. I mean, Ian Collins has just joined us now as well. You're going to be taking over from 1 o'clock when we will actually get the sentencing later, when we've heard of these details. The extraordinary thing here is, I mean, we've seen the impact. I know we're all hard bitten. You know, you're in the military, with journalists, cover a lot of cases. This one is just so hot already. We know how much this impacted the nation back last July and early August. I can see even just my producers just how emotional everybody is listening. I mean, I'm struggling to keep it together, which is just outrageous because this is about the families. I can't imagine how the families are listening to this in court about their own children.
About their own kids, and of course this detail, this level of detail, we hadn't really heard before. You know, we'd imagined the horrific nature of what had occurred, but even based on what we knew, I don't think anybody thought, could it be any worse than we'd already heard? And you get this level of detail.
Nature. And him saying when he was in the police station, he was glad. He was